Chapter 1. Rip Campbell rode out of Mexico, from down Madera way, near the Laguna Babacara, with 4 hard-riding farmers and a mob of Garcia riders smoking on his trail. It might not have been so bad if the Garcia clan hadn't been lords of that wild empire west of Chihuahua City and the frowning peaks of the Continental Divide. A place where generations of ragged peons had taken the dust before any Garcia, and the he-wolf of them all, haughty old Tio Garcia, gave life and death as he saw fit, had been no place for a lone gringo to start a flirtation, harmless though it was, with a guarded Garcia señorita. But who would have thought the fierce pride of the Garcia would have considered it a matter of death? Or who would have suspected that the girl's 2 younger brothers, the twins, Jose and Juan, would take it on themselves to guard the honor of the Garcia by waiting in the moon-drenched shadows under their sister's window? Rip Campbell hadn't. It was perhaps justice, if you were in Garcia. But young Jose made the mistake of missing with his first shot and Rip's roaring gun cut the shadowy figure down before Rip knew who it was. Guadalupe Garcia screamed behind the bars of her dark window, and abruptly hell sizzled around that part of the town. Dodging away through the night, Rip suddenly realized that the border was a long way off and the Garcia were masters of an empire in any direction. He cursed himself as he ran. "You've done it now, you thick-skulled borracho," he muttered. The old wolf himself thought them high-stepping young dandies were where the sun came up. "He'll have my hide peeled off in strips and horses pull me in too. Hell, Rip, don't you never get any sense?" Rip's horse was at a cantina hitch rack on a corner of the plaza. Loitering Mexicans stared in astonishment as the gringo came plunging out of the night, jerked the reins free, pitched into the saddle and spurred away. A rifle and cartridges were in the adobe room beyond the plaza where Rip was staying. He stopped there. Bedroll, warbag and pack horse would have to be left. He halted as he was leaving the room and jumped back for a canteen. Tumult had reached the plaza when he got outside again. Men were shouting, horses were tramping. And high, thin, shrill, above all other sounds came the scream of a frenzied man's shout. An old man's shout that cracked with age and fury as it screamed death to the gringo. That would be old Tio Garcia himself. That would be the fierce old wolf whose rages cowed everyone. Death to the gringo. And death it would be for Rip Campbell unless a miracle happened. The border was a long way off. Scrubland and mountains, deep frowning barrancas, stony desert country with a few widely separated and hidden water holes, would have to be crossed. Rip was grim, unsmiling, as he spurred past the adobe houses, past the last of the brush and cactus corrals, past the wildly barking dogs and the rippling shallows of the little creek into the open country. They followed him, of course, as fast as they could get horses saddled. And with them would be the 4 tough little farmers who had ridden in the day before. If there had been 100 farmers they all would have followed. The Garcia were heated as far away as the city of Mexico. Rip damned himself, damned the lush bright moon, damned the lazy sweet madness of Mexico that caught a man and held him until he got into something like this. And all the time he was riding furiously into the endless leagues of country stretching ahead into the northeast. No use to head anywhere else. They'd know well enough he was making for the border, and every lost hour gave them time to close the country ahead. The only safety was the border. Ride them out, ride them down, ride longer, harder, with less food, less water, less sleep. Keep ahead of them through fresh country where the word was not yet out that the Garcia wanted the death of the lone gringo who rode into the north. A man would try a journey like that only when death was sweeping at his heels. And death was following now. Rip reined up and heard it in the yelping cries, the pounding hoofs far back in the night. They couldn't see him despite the brightness of the moon. But if they drew close, if his horse stumbled, if something happened to put him afoot, they'd have him there in their sights as plain as day. That moon. That damned bright Mexican moon that shone so brightly for lovers and equally as brightly for death. No, they couldn't see him, but they knew well enough he was heading for the Ojo Azul trail and the pass through the mountains to San Miguel, and the hills, the grasslands, the deserts on beyond. Rip cut hard with the rein ends and was thankful his horse was rested, fed, watered. While the moon hung high and the night rolled past, he had to draw ahead of the pursuit, so that sunrise would find him out of sight. After dawn they'd fasten like leeches on his trail. They'd follow like wolves on a blood sign. And if they got him, they'd show no more mercy than wolves would show a wounded beast. Rip spurred his horse. This was all Garcia land stretching ahead to the watershed of the mountains to the east and far on into the north. Old Tio Garcia had never laid eyes on some of his sheep and cattle herds that ranged far in the north. Hour after hour Rip rode, past midnight and into the chill hours before dawn. At last the mountains reared high and black beside the trail and the howling of wolves was the only sound. The moon was down when he rode through the pass and took the downward slope through blackness. The faint gray dawn was in the east when he stopped for a moment to water his horse and fill the canteen at a little stream tumbling out of the mountain. Just before midday Rip looked back from a hill crest and saw a yellow column of dust far behind on the horizon. He smiled grimly and went on, searching the rolling country with red-rimmed eyes. A couple of hours later he saw grazing horses with saddle marks. He untied his rope and rode easily toward them. A bit of maneuvering, a quick hard run, and his rope settled on a wiry chestnut. The horses were part of some hacienda's caballado. The chestnut let itself be saddled without too much fight. Rip scattered the horses and rode on at a fresh gallop. It had to be this way, a man could ride and keep riding, but he had to have fresh horses. You could be sure the farmers and those riding with them would change as often as possible. Rip rode hard that afternoon and roped another horse an hour before dark and changed again. Rabbits were plentiful, and he was hungry. He shot the head off one, and at the first water tied the horse and had a tiny fire going in a minute. He cleaned, washed, halved the rabbit, spitted the pieces on green sticks over the fire. He watered the horse, filled the canteen, stripped to the waist and washed. In 20 minutes Rip was wolfing the half-cooked rabbit meat as he rode on. Water, rest, food helped mightily the night ahead. Shortly before dawn, Rip circled wide off the trail, rode back a quarter of a mile, looped his arm through the reins and lay down where the sun would strike his face. When the first blazing rays awoke him he was back in the saddle. Never had Rip Campbell made a ride like this. That yellow dust haze back on the horizon was the last sight of the pursuit, yet he knew they were back there doggedly holding the trail, hoping he'd crack under the strain, rest too long or find himself afoot. While he was in Mexico the Garcias would be trying to come up with him. They were that way, and the shrill, screaming wrath of old Tio Garcia would ride with them. A long time, 1,000 years, later Rip came out of the heat and thirst of the Chihuahua Desert to San Andres, on the Rio Grande. He was sleeping in the saddle when he rode into El Rip. He stabled the horse, rented a hotel room, fell across the bed and slept the clock around 3 times. So Rip Campbell came across the border after 3 years, younger than he looked, slender and fine down to a leather gauntness, with gold in his money belt and a fire of wry humor in his eyes as he looked back on the ride out of Mexico. Never again, partner, he promised his gaunt reflection in the hotel room mirror. Women make trouble and this last filled your boots for a long time. Wah! It looks good here after frijoles, tortilla and dried goat meat. A few days later Rip's gold was cut in half and he knew a stranger was in town. Near midnight of the third night, Rip left a saloon, sucked in the crisp night air to clear up the last 2 drinks, and walked around the next corner on his way to the hotel. He had not gone more than 50 yards when a voice across the street roared. "Look out behind you over there, stranger." Rip jumped to one side and whirled. A down-striking knife missed his back and slashed through the flesh of his right arm. And a man was on him in a furious attack, spitting furiously in Spanish, for Jose Garcia, gringo. That cleared Rip's head faster than the danger. The Garcias again. He might have known they wouldn't forget. He struck the arm away as the knife slashed in again, through the coat sleeve only this time. When the knife wrist whipped up for another try, Rip caught it. From the corner of his eye he saw a second man plunging in with a drawn gun. 2 of them, and there was a third in the background. Chapter 2. Rip wrenched at the wrist, whirled around until his back was to the adobe building wall, kicked the attacker away from him into the third man, and streaked for his gun. But the slashed arm had a cold numb feeling that half crippled it. The gun muzzle was just clearing the holster when the second man fired. Rip felt the slam of the bullet knock a leg back from under him. Then his own gun roared twice and the shadowy figure lurched back with arms flying up. At the first blast of gunfire the other 2 men plunged away into the shadows clustering darkly here along the side street. Rip threw 2 shots after the uncertain targets. The buckling leg made his aim uncertain and they kept on. Out in the street another gun blasted out. Rip, supporting himself against the wall, swung his gun that way. And the same bull-like voice he had heard before, roared. "Hey, don't you open up on me. I'm trying to help you." It looked like the moon had started raining Mexicans, Rip said wryly as the man came toward him. "Mexicans, huh? Might have known it. I was standing over there trying to make up my mind what to do when I saw the 3 of them ease around the corner after you. They looked ornery, like they might be stalking a drunk." "Only a half-drunk," said Rip. "I didn't know, stranger. But when one of them went out ahead of the others, like he was ready for business, I yelled to you. Say, you sure exploded all over them. This fella don't look like he wants any more of it." A match blazed out. The stranger bent over the figure that had collapsed on the street. He whistled admiringly as he flipped the match away. "I guess he don't want any more. You got him through the neck and the heart." One hole might be lucky, but two makes you out handy and quick with your lead, stranger. He's a dead one, all right. Uh-huh, Rip agreed. He's gone. How about giving me a hand? He put some lead in my leg. Other men were running around the corner to find what the shooting was about. And when the stranger's hand touched Rip's arm, it jerked away. Lead in your leg? What in the hell did he put in your arm? You're bleeding like a butchered beef. Knife cut, said Rip. I guess I'd better get to a doctor before most of me leaks away. You can tell the law how it happened, I guess. I'll tell them plenty and lead a bunch out to find the other two. There's been too many drunks robbed and handled roughly around town lately, they tell me. A few Mexicans strung up may stop some of it. Did you get a good look at either of the others? No, said Rip. It'll probably be a waste of time looking for them. How about getting me to a doctor? There was no lack of help, and no uncertainty as to what to do. Wounded men near the plaza were no novelty. Two of the gathering crowd locked hands and carried Rip around the corner and down a block to a doctor's office. The medico took one look and got to work. The slashed arm was easy to sew up. But a big hole had been torn in the back of the leg. Stranger in town? The doctor said. Well, a hotel room isn't the place for you. We'd better take you over to the Catholic Sisters and let them nurse you after I get this leg bandaged. If he's short on money, Doc, the bull-voiced stranger offered, I'll settle with the sisters for his nursing. I've got money, said Rip, gritting his teeth against the pain. And thank you kindly for the offer. In the lighted doctor's office he was getting his first good look at the stranger who had helped him. Iron gray hair, a deep chest, a wide strong mouth under a crisp black mustache. And dark eyes that apparently were never still, eyes with a fiery restlessness that snapped and challenged good-naturedly from sheer force of habit, if a man could judge offhand. Rip was weak, listless when they got the bleeding stopped and the wounds bandaged. He told them where his hotel room was, drank something in a glass that the doctor gave him, and let them put him on a stretcher and carry him through the streets to the adobe building occupied by the Catholic Sisters. The doctor's drink must have contained a sleeping powder. Rip was only vaguely aware that he was put between the cool clean sheets of a comfortable bed. The next thing he knew it was another day, and a smiling nun was waiting on him. Fever made the first day uncomfortable, the second day Rip felt better, and a smile spread over his face when a nun ushered the bull-voiced stranger into the room. I was hoping I'd have a chance to say thanks again, Rip said. Don't mind, the stranger chuckled. I came in to say goodbye and tell you I've got a job waiting if you ever get around to needing one. Grayson's my name, and I can be found over by Birch Pass, in western New Mexico. If you don't know that part of the country, anybody around Three Forks can direct you to Birch. I own the Birch mine. Thanks again, but the first and last time I tried mining, I swore off for good. Pick and shovel work don't suit me, Rip said good-naturedly. I've got work for any kind of a man, Grayson declared. And the better they like trouble, the faster I'll hire them. I liked the way you tied into those three, Campbell. Fast and quick, without stopping to see what it was all about. I'd like to have you come up and work for me, and the pay will open your eyes wide. When I get broke I may drop by, Rip said. Trouble, huh? Nothing, said Grayson, with a challenging squint, that keeps me away. He caressed his chin. I need a man like you. Campbell. I guess that settles it, Rip decided. I'd have had a knife in my back the other night and adobe dirt over my lace by now if you hadn't helped out. Soon as this leg lets me get around, I'll head for Birch. I was wondering if there wasn't some way of getting you to come, Grayson said heartily. After his visitor was gone, Rip lay smiling thinly. Grayson hadn't been wondering. The mine owner had been pretty sure that he'd get his man by mentioning that he needed him. Grayson had a look about him that suggested he'd get what he wanted, one way or another. And the trouble at Birch couldn't be much worse than getting shot up and cut up here in town. 2 days later one of the nuns brought Rip a small package with his name on it. You said you didn't have any friends here, Mr. Campbell, she said in smiling reproof. Surprise to me, Rip told her, squinting at his name crudely printed on the brown wrapping paper. He broke the string and unfolded the paper. A keen stiletto tumbled out on the bed covers. That, said the nun, isn't a very useful present for a sick man. Rip grinned thinly. You can't tell, ma'am. Got a letter with it, too. He read the small sheet of paper on which a message was printed in pencil. For this I know yous have. Jose's knife I carry for Jose's last wish. I will follow until I am dead. It was signed, Juan Diego de Garcia. Is your friend coming to see you? The nun asked cheerfully. Rip tore the message up and crumpled it in the wrapping paper. That's hard to say, ma'am. If he gets a chance, I reckon he'll be around. That's something to look forward to, Isn't it? She said comfortably. It sure is, Rip agreed. And I take it kindly he let me know he's thinking about me. That reminds me, ma'am, I'd kind of like my gun belt here on the chair by the bed. I get lonesome without it. A shadow crossed the nun's face. Sometimes I pray that all men will forget their guns, Mr. Campbell, she sighed. So often they come to us wounded and dying from other guns, and then ask for their own weapons at once. Rip laughed softly. It's easy to understand, sister. When you're a stranger without any friends, you get to looking on your gun as a friend. It'll never go back on you if you handle it right. And when a man gets on his back, blue and helpless, he wants his friend where he can see it and handle it. The nun nodded as she put the gun belt on the chair beside the bed. I can see how that might be, she admitted. But you have just heard from a friend, you shouldn't be feeling so blue that you need your gun to cheer you up. 2 friends are better than 1, Rip said jokingly. Anyway, I'm not sure just when my other friend can get around to see me. When the nun left the room, Rip lifted the gun belt and holster across his lap, replaced the 2 used cartridges and made sure the gun was ready for quick use. He hung the belt on the chair where he could reach the gun instantly, and then picked up the keen steel dagger with a faint smile. This show of bravado was something you could expect from a haughty young fellow like Juan Garcia. At least it was a help to know exactly what he had in mind. Rip had recognized Juan Garcia as the man who had slashed his arm. His hunch had been right that he hadn't seen the last of the Garcia. The fact that one had come into town with help, had located his man, and had waited for the best time to make an attack was ample proof that the Garcia were on a blood trail. Now came this warning that another attack might be made at any time and any place. Until he was dead, Juan Garcia had written. Until a more Rip. Young, fierce in grief and pride, the surviving twin brother was dedicating his life to killing the gringo who had shot Jose Garcia. Rip sighed and put the knife on the chair. And all over a pair of black eyes where no harm was meant, he said to himself. Rip, old son, you sure flirted yourself into a mess. Now I got to kill another one before I can sleep easy. And I ain't got a thing in the world against the boy, Rip muttered. I'll have prayers said by a priest for you, Juan, my bloodthirsty young rooster, after I have to kill you. Maybe that'll make Jose and Guadalupe and the old wolf himself feel better about it. Chapter 3. A little more than 2 weeks later Rip walked to the stage station with only a slight limp and bought a ticket to Three Forks. He had a debt to pay. The sooner settled, the better. He saw nothing of the slender, dandified figure of Juan Garcia. But that meant little. Any passing Mexican, any one of the score or so of men loitering about when the stage pulled out, might be watching for Juan Garcia. One thing he could be sure of, Juan Garcia was checking the gringo's movements. Three Forks was far west of the Rio Grande, where the harsh rise of the mountains broke down into the soft brown swells of a vast plain. Dry grasslands and semi-desert to the south, mountains to the north, high peaks hazy in the blue sky to the east and west, and a little river singing over a rocky bed through the town. That was Three Forks, and there was an overnight wait for the stage through Birch Pass. In the morning the hotel proprietor was fat and talkative in the lobby. Heading up to the Birch? He asked, squinting at Rip. Yes. Aiming to work for Bull Grayson, I take it. Rip grinned at the way they'd tagged Grayson's bull-like voice. He nodded. Grayson sort of hired me in town a few weeks ago. Said the proprietor, nodding wisely. You ain't the only one. Better than a dozen has gone up to the Birch since Bull went back. Half a dozen come in with him. He rubbed a broad chin that was smooth and pinky soft after a morning shave. His eyes ran over Rip appraising him. Aiming to work in the mine? Rip shrugged. Another wise nod, a half-squinting look, and the proprietor jerked his head toward a girl sitting on the other side of the low-ceilinged lobby. Bull's daughter is riding the stage. He'll take it kindly if you put yourself out to help her. She was looking out a front window. As if sensing Rip's gaze, she turned. Not too pretty, Rip decided, but she looked as if she had spirit and humor. She glanced out her window again and saw something that made her smile. Katie Grayson's some gal, the proprietor remarked. Katie, huh? Named Catherine, I guess. They've always called her Katie. She used to live around here until her mother died 8-9 years ago, when she went east to relatives and school. She ain't been back more than twice since then. I better make you acquainted. Rip assented without enthusiasm. The proprietor led him over and introduced him to the girl with a flourish. Miss Katie, I better make you acquainted with this man who's going to work at the Birch. Campbell's his name. He'll be glad to help you in any way on the trip up. She was not much more than 19, and her eyes were gray, cool, estimating. Rip thought there was a lot of her father in the look she gave him. Thank you, Mr. Campbell, she said. What are you going to do at the Birch? "I don't know," answered Rip. "Your father said that he needed men." A shadow crossed Katie Grayson's face. "I've heard that men don't stay long at the mine anymore," she remarked. "Your dad did sort of hint at that," Rip admitted. Katie Grayson looked at him again. Rip could almost hear her asking him how long he was going to stay. If she had put it in words, it would have been a challenge, but she did not have to put it in words. Her look was a challenge. Rip smiled. "Maybe we'll come out together," he suggested. "We might, if you stay that long," Katie Grayson smiled back. When the heavy stage lumbered out of Three Forks, Rip rode beside the lanky, grizzled driver. 5 other passengers and Katie Grayson were inside the coach. The driver was loquacious. "Going to Birch, huh?" he said, squinting across his shoulder. "I reckon you're all set to get poisoned quick." "Poisoned?" "Lead poison," the driver chuckled. "There ain't many besides Bull Grayson that stays long at Birch these days." "I've been hearing that," Rip said dryly. "Grayson must be plenty man." "Friend," said the driver, "Bull Grayson ain't a man this last couple of years. He's hell, harnessed and whipping the devil along." "That," suggested Rip, "calls for more on the subject." The driver spat and hunched over the reins as he talked from the corner of his mouth. "Birch is way out ahead there to hell and gone, with the border at the back steps," he said, pointing. "The country's cut up with hills and mountains, and salted and peppered with hell for leather gun artists that don't like decent folks. Nice neighbors. I reckon they've got to settle someplace." "They did," said the driver. "The border's near enough for a quick jump if things get hot. Most of that Birch country is private pasture that's been took over by Lee Bescombe and his bunch." "Never heard of them," said Rip. "But I take it Bescombe and the boys are loaded for trouble." "That'll say it a little, mister. Those Birch Hills make a sweet buzzard's roost where they can sight meat in any direction. And Bull Grayson squats right there in their faces, working a high-grade gold mine." "You do make it sound kind of interesting," Rip grinned. The driver snorted. "It's downright murder and suicide. Any other man but Bull Grayson would have packed up and moved to other parts after a little of it. Grayson looked kind of stubborn to me. That ain't the name for it. He's bullheaded. He swears he'll work that mine until hell's out of firewood or his high grade runs out. When trouble busts, Bull holes up with his men and fights it out. Can't blame a man for that." "There ain't any blame," the driver said, shrugging. "But the way it uses up men is a sight. Bull's paying double and triple wages to keep men working, not to speak of gunfighters he hires. If he wasn't mining on a high-grade vein, there wouldn't be no profit. How about the law helping him out? The law has wore itself to a frazzle. The county seat and the sheriff is a long ways off. The sheriff can't stay up there in the hills the year round. Not to speak of posses getting skittish about picking lead out of their teeth to help Bull Grayson. It's reached the point where Grayson's been told if he wants to work his mine, he better do most of the worrying and all of the fighting." Under the grizzled mustache, the driver's mouth split in a meaning smile as he looked at his passenger. "There'll be work for you up at Birch all right, mister. Week before last I brought back a load of Grayson's help that had their bellies full of it. Not to speak of a belly full of fresh lead a couple was carrying. Anything in pants that'll stay up at Birch and fight can get on the payroll now." "Fresh lead sounds like fresh trouble," remarked Rip. "Nothing unusual," the driver told him. "Bull rushed a gold shipment out with some of his gunfighters riding guard. They had a running fight with some of the Bescombe bunch. Word was got out some way that the gold was moving. I brought down a couple of the men that got wounded in the fight. Bull couldn't stop to take them onto Three Forks with the gold." "It don't exactly sound like a place for a girl," Rip commented. "It ain't. I didn't want to bring her," the driver confessed glumly. "Bull Grayson don't know she's coming. He'd have rode down to Three Forks roaring like 40 bulls to head her off. And don't you think she won't be hustled back quick?" The driver shook his head helplessly. "I knew Katie when she was playing with dolls. Even then she had a mind of her own. I'm only hoping Bull don't jump me for bringing her up to him." "He might wonder why you didn't say no to her and let it go at that," Rip suggested dryly. The driver gave him an indignant look. "I said no so fast it like to choked me, and Katie smiled sweet and said she'd hire a horse and saddle and ride up alone. She'd have done just that, too. I know her. Sweet and pretty, and Bull Grayson from bit to cinches when she sets her mind on something. You got any other suggestions to make about handling Katie Grayson?" "Nope," Rip said briefly. "I'll leave it to her daddy and you. But I don't see where anything much can happen to her. She's a woman. And Lee Bascombe," said the stage driver, "is a rattler with his fangs sharpened by 9 years in the Yuma pen. He come out sweated down to a sack of bones, a cough that sounds like a dead man, and poison and hate leaking from every pore. The men he's collected around him ain't any better. He gave Rip a shrewd glance. "For all I know, you may be one of them heading to the mine to get on the payroll." "I might be," Rip chuckled. "Well, if you are," said the driver, "you know that Lee Bascombe is hungry for gold. And you know that Bascomb's took a hate to Bull Grayson that ain't hardly human. I reckon it's because Grayson's shot up so many of his men and kept the mine running." "I don't know all that," Rip told him. "But I reckon I'll soon find out." "You bet you will, mister." The miles rolled by and Rip pondered what the driver had told him. No wonder Grayson needed men. No wonder there had been a challenge in the man's manor back in town, and another challenge in Katie Grayson's look in Three Forks. She must know what her father was up against. Rip marveled that the girl should be coming in this manner, without her father's knowledge, as cool and determined as Bull Grayson might have been himself. The rough dusty road struck higher every mile. To the north and south, and in the west ahead, the dry barren hills rolled higher. Now and then a faint wagon track cut off from the road, but a man could look hard and not find much evidence of travel turning off the road to ranches and mines. A bleak, barren loneliness seemed to blanket the landscape. Perhaps the feeling sprang from what the stage driver had told him. For this was outlaw country all right, this was one of those harsh, deserted, lawless stretches of country where honest men were not welcome and strangers riding through did well to keep out of sight until they knew whom they were meeting. An hour before noon horses were changed at a small stage station. "Anyone on the road ahead of us?" the driver asked one of the two men in charge of the station. "Nope," was the answer. "We're looking for some more wagons through today, but they ain't showed up yet." The driver's long whip rushed the fresh horses on at a trot. 2 hours passed before he said, "Ought to have sighted them more wagons by now. I most generally pass them before this when they're coming down from the birch same day I go up." "Could anything have happened to them?" Rip asked. "Probably not," the driver answered. "But it ain't never any surprise to hear there's been more trouble." Now the hills were higher. The ascending and descending grades became crooked as the road entered rougher country. In one place a rocky ridge studded with cactus and low growth thrust to the road on the left-hand side. The road swung sharply around the other side of the ridge out of sight. Rip was rolling a cigarette as the stage rolled abreast of the rocks. A shot, a warning yell called attention to a man who had jumped up into sight among the rocks. His yell reached them. "Pull up!" 2 other gunmen with triggered rifles rose up into view as the stage driver cursed and hauled back on the reins. "Don't stop here," Rip shouted. "Whip them horses up. They got us covered." Rip grabbed the reins and the whip, and the long leather lash whistled out over the horses. "Fight it out and run it out," Rip ordered as he reached behind the seat for his rifle. "Damn you! We ain't got a chance," the driver yelled. "Only 3 of them. And 30 more maybe hit around." Chapter 4. Rip was frantically chambering a cartridge as the gunmen up in the rocks opened fire. The lurching stage made a difficult target. They had a chance if Lee didn't drop one of the horses. Rip had sized up the odds before he grabbed the reins. The gunmen up among the rocks were afoot. If the stage made the turn in the road just ahead, it would put the outlaw guns behind and there would be a chance in a running fight. Just a chance, but it was worth taking. A bullet screamed past Rip's head as he swung the rifle back of the driver's shoulders and took a snapshot at the nearest outlaw. The driver was cursing and clawing at the reins, but he was rattled, frightened, and the horses were running hard. "I'll throw you off if you pull on them reins," Rip yelled as he jerked up the rifle for another shot. "You damn fool. You're crazy," the driver shouted. "We'll all get killed." Rip fired again. His target staggered back and fell. 1 down. 2 up there still shooting. They must have been so sure the stage would stop that they were rattled some themselves, or they would have shot at the horses instead of trying to knock the men off the driver's seat. And then suddenly the driver dropped the reins and fell over against Rip. "I'm hit. They got me, you damn fool." Rip's hand caught the man as he started to topple off the seat. "Ease back and hang on. We ain't stopping now." With a mighty effort, Rip heaved the driver around, half over the back of the seat. Crouching, with one knee on the wildly swaying seat, Rip lifted the rifle again, just as a hammer blow of fire grazed the top of his head and knocked him blind, dizzy, weak. He felt himself falling forward toward the horses and tried to claw back on the seat. Then a terrific lurch staggered him off the side of the footboard into space. The world was a blur of hoofs and wheels, gunshots and noise as Rip fell. He caught a blurred glimpse of white staring faces inside the stagecoach, and then he struck hard, and the road battered, pounded and tore at him as he sprawled helplessly beside the rumbling thunder of the heavy stage wheels. The wheels just missed him, and then he was alone, half-stunned, gasping in the yellow dust cloud behind the receding stage. Rip's first clear thought as he struggled to his knees was that he still held the rifle in a death grip. Blood was running into his eyes. The dry gritty taste of dirt was in his mouth as he staggered up. But he could move, he could see as he shook his head fiercely to clear his senses. The galloping four-horse team was still dragging the careening stage around the sharp turn. The scream of a bullet sang in Rip's ear. He ducked and stumbled off the road. On this side there were rocks that had tumbled down from the slope and had been rolled aside when the road was leveled through. Rip fell behind a big boulder. An instant later the vicious buzz of lead ricocheted off the rock. The stage vanished around the turn. The shooting had stopped. Only those three men had appeared. Rip swiped blood out of his left eye. His face had dug into the road. It felt as if it had passed through a meat chopper. Danger was whipping his mind clear, driving strength back through his body. Still the gun stayed silent. Rip risked a look from behind the rock. Two running figures were ducking around the shoulder of the ridge. Rip shot at them, missed, and they were gone. Rip spit dirt from his mouth and considered. The two men must be heading after the stage. That would be the only reason they didn't try to gun him out from behind his rock. Wearily Rip stood up. The third man's gun did not open up at him as he made for the turn in the road. Before he reached the turn he heard horses drum into a gallop. A moment later the stretch of road around the turn was in sight. Far ahead the racing stage was throwing up a dust cloud. Two riders were spurring out of a little gully in the side of the ridge and heading after the stage. Rip sat down in the road for steadiness, braced the rifle, sighted carefully, squeezed the trigger. He missed and tried again. This time the rider on the right weaved in the saddle, sagged forward, and held on with both hands as he kept going. The other man looked back and rode on hard also. Rip stood up breathing heavily. Now that the furious strain was over he was shaking. The top of his head burned painfully. He felt the spot and found a raw furrow through the hair roots. Only by a fraction of an inch had death missed him, by a still smaller fraction he had escaped being creased and knocked cold. He smiled wryly. His voice came thick and husky through the dirt taste in his mouth. Maybe my luck's took a turn for better. Wonder if it's still gonna hold? In the crooked little gully that had washed back in the ridge, Rip found a third horse tied to a mesquite bush. Bruised lips pursed in a silent whistle as Rip surveyed the magnificent cream-colored animal. The horse had a snow-white star on its forehead, a snow-white stocking on the right foreleg. It was a stallion, clean-limbed, powerful, with unmistakable signs of Arabian blood. Some horse thief sure made a pretty steal. Rip muttered admiringly. You're enough to make a horse thief out of most anyone. Wish I knew your name. The stallion stood with warily lifted head as Rip approached, speaking soothingly. Its heavy saddle was tooled leather. Bit chains were silver. Silver conchas were on the bridle. Mexican-style tapaderos boxed the stirrups in front and hung down the sides. An empty rifle boot was made of the same fine, hand-tooled leather. If I was curious, I'd say you might belong to this Lee Bascombe himself, Rip murmured softly. But I ain't curious. We'll just ride on to Birch. Steady, boy, steady. The stallion looked as if he might fight a strange rider in the saddle. But after standing a moment in indecision, he answered the pressure of the reins and turned to the road. Rip thrust his rifle into the boot and put the horse into a long easy gallop. Now the country was rougher every mile. The road had few straight stretches. The stage had vanished and did not come in sight again. Miles from the scene of the fight, Rip marked where the two outlaw riders had turned south off the road. Trees began to appear on the hill slopes and finally the birch mine was not far ahead. The faint far-off trip hammer thunder of a small stamp mill drifted through the hills. Rip rode around the shoulder of a mountain, and the grade pitched down. The mine was half a mile ahead, in the mouth of a V-shaped valley that knifed back into the mountain. A boiler stack spewed black smoke. A haze of rock dust hung around a small battery of mill stamps. Some of the mine buildings were rock and adobe, others were timber covered with sheet iron. Surrounding the area of several acres around the shaft mouth was a triple fence of barbed wire. And as Rip came nearer, he saw armed guards patrolling the fence. The nearest guard stared in his direction, half lifted a rifle, then lowered it and waited. The barbed wire came to within 100 yards of the road, and under one corner of the wire ran a little mountain stream that crossed the road under a short bridge and foamed on down the steep slope in a narrow rocky channel. Two guards were at the massive wood and wire gate as Rip rode up. Heavy ore wagons stood inside the stockade, but there was no sign of the stagecoach. "Stage get here?" Rip called. "Yep," said the nearest guard. "Who in hell are you?" "I was on the stage." The guard was a cold-eyed, wolfish man. He wore a saturnine look of disbelief as he eyed Rip. "Only one feller left the stage. He was shot off. What's the idea of riding in like this claiming you're him?" Rip eased over in the saddle and shrugged. "I ain't seen my face, but it feels like hell. I was shot off the stage and fell off on my face. Don't it look it?" "Kind of," was the grudging admission. "Where'd you get that horse?" "Found him." "Did the coach have any more trouble?" "Nope. One of the passengers drove it in. Bull Grayson furnished a driver to take it on after the horses was changed. The passengers wanted to travel fast beyond any trouble that might come up over the fight." Men were hurrying toward them and the other guard was opening the big gate as Rip asked, "What happened to the stage driver?" "They took him on to get a doctor. He was tore up pretty bad where the bullet came out. Chances are he ain't gonna live. I reckon you better ride in and explain." "Explain what?" "Bull Grayson will tell you." There was an ominous note in the guard's voice. Rip narrowed his eyes slightly and rose inside the wire. More men had appeared. Most of them looked like miners ready to go to work, but some wore guns and riding boots and had hands that had never been hardened by pick and shovel work. And when you looked close you could see the faint swagger that seemed to grow on many gunmen who lived always on the edge of trouble. Rip reined up beside one such man, a small, sharp-featured, shrewd-looking one with red hair and a big gun tied down in an oiled holster. The red-haired gunman took a cornhusk cigarette from the corner of his mouth and stared. "Some horse you got?" "I thought so when I got him," Rip said coolly. "Where's Grayson?" "He's around. No telling where. Hitch over there at the office and look." A small sign across the front of a low stone building straight ahead read, "Concho Mine." The windows of the building were small. A massive door suggested a fort rather than a mine office. Rip dismounted at a hitch rack at the side of the building. As he glanced across the saddle he saw the small, red-headed gunman hurrying into the office. The hammering steel stamps crushing rock or the powder in the stamp mill filled the air with an unceasing roar of sound. Rip stretched stiffly and looked around. The mine shaft ran straight into the side of the mountain. Here were racing machinery and sweating working men burrowing into the rock. Here was high-grade ore that meant easy wealth. Here at least should be safety. But Bull Grayson's gold mine suddenly seemed like fat rich meat out here in the wild loneliness. Rich meat for outlaw buzzards to tear and pluck at their leisure. The triple fencing of barbed wire took on a frail and uncertain look against the danger that must lurk by day and night on all sides. Staring men were beginning to stroll up as Rip shaped a cigarette and stepped to the office door. And he was blocked there at the door by a lean cat-hipped man, who appeared in the doorway. "Grayson inside?" Rip asked. "Who wants him?" The man had a knife-edged smile under a black mustache. "I do," said Rip with a touch of impatience. "Who in the hell are you?" Rip drew a breath and shut his teeth over a hot retort. The birch wasn't giving much of a welcome. "It don't happen to be your damn business," he said evenly. "But the name is Campbell. I'm the fellow who was shot off the stage. Who in hell are you?" "Me?" said the other with a thin smile. "I'm Dan Hogan. I run things when Grayson ain't around. And if you're the hot-headed fool who like to got Grayson's daughter killed on the stage, you ain't wanted around here. Get going." "Was the girl hurt?" Rip asked quickly, with a sudden wave of apprehension. "No fault of yours she wasn't," Hogan said unpleasantly. "Get off the mine property before I throw you off. My mouth tastes bad when I look at you and think of that full play you made." A dozen men were near enough to hear what Hogan said, and more were coming. "Get a gun and throw me off," Rip suggested. Dan Hogan put his hands on his lean hips and smiled coldly. "If it's gunplay you want," he said, "I'll call some of the boys to cut you down and have it over with. We don't settle arguments with guns around here. Not among ourselves. We've got plenty of that to do with outsiders." Gun talk gets stopped quick inside the wire. "Take your choice, fellow, and make it fast. I'm too busy to waste time on you." Rip lost his head. The instant he unbuckled his gun belt and threw it aside, he knew he had lost his head. Hogan had been goading him to do just this. And the gun belt was still in the air when Hogan jumped at him. Chapter 5. Rip dodged, but Hogan came down off the office steps so fast that no man could have gotten out of the way. Hogan came plunging with his fist cocked for a smashing blow, and if the blow missed, the weight of his rush would still knock the victim sprawling. Rip did the one thing that gave him a chance. He dropped, ducking forward as he went down, and his shoulder and side knocked Hogan's legs out from under and sent the slightly taller man plunging on in a helpless sprawling fall. "Wow!" one of the onlookers whooped. That brought him down fast. Rip whipped up, and was on Hogan as the man rose, with the skinned hand and the smile wiped from his face. A smashing blow knocked Hogan down again before he could get his balance. But he rolled like a cat and came lunging up, spitting oaths. The gun crease across Rip's head, the stupefying fall from the speeding stage had taken toll. The edge of his own speed was gone. Aches, bruises, weary muscles kept him from responding as he should have. His next blow at Hogan fell short as the man came to his feet, and Hogan's fist crashed into Rip's cheek and staggered him. Hogan was wild-eyed, furious as he ducked and rushed behind his flailing fists. Rip staggered back from the blows, jumped aside to the edge of the crowd. As Hogan whirled and came at him again, Rip crouched. He came up inside Hogan's arms with a driving uppercut that snapped the man's head far back. Only Hogan's quick grab saved him from going down again. Rip tried to fight free from Hogan's relentless grip. Hogan was kicking wildly and trying to trip him. They wrestled back against the nearest men, and a leg that was not Hogan reached out and tripped Rip. As he went down, he caught one glimpse of the short red-headed gunman directly at the spot where he had been tripped, then he was on the ground and Hogan was kicking, stamping him. A boot grazed Rip's head and half-stunned him. He was done for and knew it as he tried clumsily to roll and protect his head with his arms. He would be lucky if Hogan stopped short of murder with the boots. He'd be lucky if he lived and came out of it with a face scarred for life. A bull-voiced bellow cut through the noisy cries of the crowd. "What's going on here? Stand back, Hogan. I told you no more of this. Who is he?" Blood again smeared Rip's face as he got dizzily to a knee. Bull Grayson's big hand caught his arm and jerked him to his feet. "So it's you, is it?" Bull Grayson exclaimed roughly. Grayson wore a khaki coat, his head was bare and his face was as hard and dark as the ore out of his mine. Rip weaved unsteadily, trying to catch his breath. He could feel fresh blood on his face and his head was spinning. Hogan, his own face cut and bruised, was scowling, panting heavily beyond Grayson's shoulder. Rip grinned coldly at Grayson from mashed lips. "It's me," he said thickly. "And this is about what I had billing for trying to help a lady. I figured I'd ride in and pass the time of day so you'd know I was all right. But it didn't matter, did it? Not even a man went down the road to make sure what had happened to me. Next time I'll sit back and let the gun artists have a lady. Maybe you'll sing a different tune if the Bascombe bunch ever get their hands on her." Bull Grayson's look narrowed in sharp speculation. "Campbell, are you trying to tell me that was on your mind when you whipped the stage on and started a fight? What else?" Rip demanded. "The driver had been giving me the lowdown on this Bascombe bunch. The hotel man in Three Forks asked me to keep an eye on the young lady until she got to you. What do you figure would have happened if those gunslicks had stepped up to the stage and found your daughter inside? Maybe they knew it already. She was around Three Forks long enough for word to be carried ahead. I saw a chance to get her out of it and grabbed it." The black look passed from Grayson's face. "I hadn't thought about it that way," he muttered. "The stage driver said you lost your head and brought on bad trouble when it could have been avoided by giving up pocket money and letting the stage go on. The stage passengers felt the same way about it." Grayson spat and his face darkened again. "The Bascombe bunch," he said harshly, "wouldn't dare lay a hand on my daughter." "Maybe you're sure of it," Rip told him curtly. "I wasn't." He folded his bandana, wiped blood from his face and looked around. "Where's my gun belt? I'll be riding on." Bull Grayson spread big hands. His eyes pleaded for understanding of things he didn't put into words. "What's done is done," he said. "Maybe I was too hasty. It was a shock seeing my daughter when I wasn't looking for her and hearing how close to death she was in that gun brush. It upset me a heap. Campbell, you can write your own ticket as to how you'd like all this evened up to suit you." Rip studied him. Grayson's eyes still seemed to be trying to say more than he had spoken. "I reckon that covers it," Rip said. "What's done is done. Maybe I'll have better luck the next time I'm jumped." Dan Hogan had recovered his aplomb and wiped a smear of blood from the corner of his mouth. "This man," he said harshly, "rode in on a horse he got from those gunmen. If you ask me, they might have a damn good reason why they furnished him with a horse." "What makes you so sure where I got the horse?" Rip demanded. Grayson gestured impatiently. "Hogan, you're on the wrong track there. Why should Campbell have started trouble if he had any connection with them? His play would have been to set back and let them handle it to suit themselves. Anyhow, I know Campbell's all right on that score. What upset me was the thought of Katie sitting there with bullets flying. But that's past. Campbell, I hope you'll stay here at the mine." Rip looked at Hogan, and then turned and found the short red-haired gunman in the crowd about them. He was thoughtful as he nodded to Grayson. "I'll stay." "Good," said Grayson. "Pick a bunk in the bunkhouse and draw some blankets. Supper won't be long now. After you get settled, I'd like to talk to you in the office. Where can I put my horse?" "Junior Stern, the ostler over at the stable, will take care of him for you. Right over behind the bunkhouse. You'll see the corral. Hogan, I want to talk to you." A big, bearded miner handed Rip his gun belt and gun. "It sure did me good to see you almost whip Hogan, young feller," he said, smiling broadly. "I seen what he was up to when he started prodding with that damn sneering mouth of his. When he don't like a man, he honest to get him down and put the boots to him. And you was smart not to reach for a gun, with him standing there easy and unarmed. He'd have plugged you with a derringer he keeps up his sleeve. We're onto his tricks around here, but he's poison to a stranger who don't outthink him." "I'm obliged," said Rip. "I guess I'll be seeing you again, mister. Can't miss me if we both stay around this hellhole. Ask for Leo Calhoun if you got any questions you want answered. I'll be loafing around when I ain't working in the tunnel on the evening shift." The stable was a long, open-front adobe shed fronted by a pole corral. Junior Stern, Rip reckoned, would be the slender young man perched on one of the top poles of the corral, smoking a cigarette. He jumped down, took the cigarette from his mouth and stood staring as Rip rode up and dismounted. "Junior Stern?" Rip asked. "You bet," said the other, still looking at the cream-colored stallion. "Here's a horse that rates the best you can give him." There was evidently a fair amount of Indian blood in the Mexican ostler. Broad cheekbones and the magnificent, rugged lines of his young face were all Indian. The light shade of his skin and good English spoke of the mix. "By golly," Junior Stern said with admiration, "I never seen such a horse. I bet you had to kill Jim Riley to get him." "What's that you said?" Rip countered quickly. The young stable boy pointed to the snow-white star on the stallion's forehead, and the white foreleg. "Plenty people, I bet, know this horse if they see him miles away. Me, my friend, I never seen him before, but I've heard plenty about him. He's Jim Riley's horse." Rip whistled softly. "I've crossed that wolf's trail down in Old Mexico. He's a bad one. 3 years ago some of us rode up to a hacienda north of Culiacan a few hours after some bandits led by Riley had raided the place. I'll never forget what that bunch of wolves left behind. They'd pushed the old Don feet first into a bonfire and there wasn't a young woman left on the place." Junior Stern dropped the cigarette and crossed himself. "He's plenty good if he's dead," he said, reaching for the reins. "And one less to ride with this damn Lee Bascom and make trouble around here. How did you kill him, amigo?" "He was one of the bucks who jumped the stage," explained Rip. "Are you sure Riley has been riding with the Bascom bunch?" "Sure. Plenty people know that." "That's one to think over," Rip decided. Riley was a big enough wolf himself not to have to ride around under another man. The ostler nodded. Maybe, Rip decided, things got too hot for Riley down in Mexico and he had to jump north of the border and do the best he could. He was so ornery, I guess most decent outlaws didn't want him around. "Maybe," suggested Junior Stern with a flash of white teeth, "maybe Jim found a bigger wolf than himself when he met this Lee Bascom. He's a devil, this Bascom. I tell you." Rip laughed. He liked this shrewd, cheerful young kid. "I hear Bascom's all of that. But the devil's evidently met his match this time in Bull Grayson. There's gold still coming out of the mountain here, no matter what Bascom does about it, eh?" Junior Stern replied with an enigmatic look. "Gold's plenty damn funny, huh? Makes funny things happen. Sometimes I reckon it does." Stern shrugged eloquently, half smiling, half in earnest. "Gold's damn funny, I tell you," he said. "It's gold what keeps Grayson here working the birch. It's gold what keeps these damn full men coming up here to work, and new men coming when the old ones don't stand it no more. It's gold keeps me, Junior Stern, here when I have nightmares in my sleep, I tell you. Amigo, if you think I'm not afraid, if you think no one else is afraid around here, you watch close for a couple days and nights and see what you think then." Rip smiled. "I'll do that," he promised. "And don't hold Jim against my horse. The caballo couldn't help who rode him." "Me," said Junior Stern, shrugging. "I'm not so sure about anything, my friend." Chapter 6. Rip laughed and walked off stiffly to find blankets for a bunk and get washed up before supper time. The long low bunkhouse had thick adobe walls. The bunk-lined interior, with eating tables down the middle, was heavy with the reek of hard-working, close-packed humanity. The cookhouse was built on one end. Men grouped inside the doorway broke off talk as Rip entered with his blankets. He looked for a vacant bunk with their staring eyes on him. "Miner or gun-toter?" a bearded miner demanded from across the room. "Gun-toter," Rip replied pleasantly, since the man was civil enough. "Gun-toter's bunks is nearest the door there where they can get out fustest and fastest. That top bunk, fourth from the end, ain't being used." Rip looked in the bunk. "There's blankets and a slicker in it." The miner showed white teeth in his beard. "Pitch them out, stranger. He's got 3 feet of dirt over his chin to keep out the rain and the cold. She's yours as long as you last." Half an hour later a great clanging on an iron bar outside brought a rush for supper. After the meal the men straggled outside, rolling smokes and talking. From one of the men he questioned, Rip learned that in a few minutes a shift would come out of the mine and another shift go in. 2 shifts a day. Bull Grayson was ripping the rich high-grade gold ore out as fast as he could find men to work. Now and then when the working force was thinned out, the Birch had to go on a one-shift schedule. All that sounded natural enough. But in the thickening twilight, Rip began to sense something inside the barbed wire enclosure that was not quite natural. Over the birch mine, over the hammering little stamp mill, over the clatter of machinery in the mill shed, and the sight of many men living and working in one spot, hung a secretive, furtive tension. Now and then man glanced uneasily past the triple barbed wire to the raw, ragged hills looming darkly all about. Twilight was bringing a savage, lonely aspect to the landscape. Rip got a feeling that the hammering steel stamps were pounding a noisy defiance to dangers that lurked back in the hills out of sight. And a feeling that most of the men did not share that defiance. Gold had brought them here. Gold kept them here. But they did not like it. A lurking, hidden, secret fear that men tried to hide was something new. Rip wondered what days, weeks of it would do to taut, raw nerves. Hard-cased as most of the men seemed to be, the greater part of them evidently were not used to living by the law of steel and lead all the time. They were hard rock men, used to sledges and drills, picks and shovels and the dull, heavy explosions of powder down in the mines. Not the whiplash snap and snarl of killer guns. A gaunt, stoop-shouldered man wearing spectacles and a bookkeeper's black cloth sleeve guards came up and touched Rip's arm. "Are you Campbell?" "Right. Mr. Grayson would like to see you in the office." The stone office had an outer and an inner room, and quarters behind where Grayson evidently lived. Grayson was sitting at a desk inside a counter that split the office in half. He got up as Rip entered. "Come in the back room, Campbell." Rip followed, and leaned his rifle against a desk in the back room. Grayson sat down at the desk. His mouth had a new hardness under the crisp black mustache. The snapping, challenging eyes were as restless as ever as Grayson looked his visitor over and caressed his chin. "How do you like it, Campbell?" "Hard to tell." "Don't like it, eh?" "I didn't say so. You had a sample today on the stage of what we're up against all the time." Bull Grayson dropped a hand to the desk edge and drummed his fingers softly. "Just a sample." "Next time," said Rip, grinning, "I'll try to keep my face from getting so messed up. It ain't much of a face, but I've got to look at it in mirrors and I'm kind of fond of it." Grayson nodded. "You're not worried much, I see. I had an idea you wouldn't be. Campbell, I'd like to make plain at the start that when I find a man I can trust, I pay him well. Plenty more than he'd ever get anywhere else. Gold seems to buy everything around here," drawled Rip. "What does all this extra pay get you?" "Men that will work here at the Birch. Regular pay ought to get that." Grayson scowled. "It ought to, but it isn't. I'm pretty much alone up here, if you want the truth. These men are all here for what they can get out of me in the mine. 9 out of 10 would sell me out if they thought it would pay better." Rip lifted his eyebrows. "That many? This isn't a cattle ranch, it's a gold mine," Grayson snapped. "And when men work in gold, they don't give a damn for anything but gold. I'm going to have to put you on night watch tonight, Campbell. We're short-handed and gold is piling up in the safe over there. The outlaws seem to have ways of knowing when gold is on hand." "I got a whisper of it from the stage driver," Rip nodded. He had an idea someone on the payroll here was in cahoots with the Bescombe bunch. Bull Grayson slammed both his clenched fists on the desk. He was right. "But I've never been able to find out who it is. We watch for days and don't see anyone around. We send out bagged concentrates to the smelter and they go through safely. But if there's bar gold from the amalgam tables hidden in the concentrates, chances are we can expect trouble. Bar gold is what they want, and I've got to send it out. The smelter is too far to freight the ore out. We've got to reduce it to concentrates here, take off all the values we can, and try to get them out some way. And it gets harder every month. Somebody is tipping my hand right along. Ought to be easy to find who it is," Rip said thoughtfully. "I'll pay 5,000 in gold in town to the man who stops it." Rip smiled wryly. "Gold again. I'll be saying it in my sleep. Every move that's made around here butts up against gold. You didn't offer me a job here to spy on your help, did you?" "No," Grayson denied quickly, too quickly almost, Rip thought. "I spotted you for a good man, and I need good men. I'll be frank with you, Campbell. If this mine was twice as rich as it is, it wouldn't be profitable the way things are going. I'm spending a fortune to keep men at work, and the damned outlaws are getting more than I make. Men who aren't as stubborn as I am would have closed the mine down and quit before they were entirely cleaned out. I'm running at a loss." Grayson was blazing with anger. His fist clenched and unclenched as it rested on the desk, and his eyes were snapping with fury. Rip looked at him and smiled faintly. "Why not put it up to the wild bunch outside your wire fences? If I was leading a bunch of gunnies, with such easy pickings around, I'd take good care not to make the place close down. It'd be kinda like killing the goose that lays the golden eggs. And, damn it, there I go tossing my loop over gold talk, too. Grayson's reply was harsh. Lee Bascombe would rather have the mine closed down, flooded out, ruined, abandoned, and me run out of these parts busted, than get his loop on all the gold we take out. Something personal in it? Rip suggested. No. Grayson denied violently, but his eyes narrowed. And that offer of 5,000 gold still holds? Rip asked. I'll make it 10,000, Grayson offered quickly. 10,000 in bar gold, paid over to your say-so in town. Gold again, said Rip. I'm getting so I don't like the sound of it. Mister, I didn't come here looking for bar gold. I had a tally against me to check off. You saved my hair in town, and if helping you keep your gold mine open will make us even, I'll take that way. I always aim to pay off when I can. Bull Grayson leaned back in the chair as if he were relieved. Fair enough, Campbell, if that's the way you feel about it. And I'll insist on you taking the gold also. Your work will give you the run of the mine and any outside riding you want to do. I suggest you don't seem too friendly with me. We're on our own, pretty much, as far as the law is concerned. Murder is easy. Watch your step. I usually do, Rip said dryly. I'll count on you keeping this under your hat. Who else do I take orders from? Dan Hogan. No one else. Hogan, huh? Said Rip, touching his face reminiscently. Friend of yours? He does what he's told to do. He misjudged the way I felt about you today. He'll not make you any more trouble. I've given him his orders. That's good, said Rip mildly. He picked up his rifle and turned to the door. His hand was on the knob when he heard Katie Grayson say in the front room. Good evening, Mr. Hogan. Is father in here? I was just coming in myself to see, Miss Katie. Rip opened the door. Katie Grayson was coming around the end of the counter. Dan Hogan was halfway to the inner door, waiting for her. Hogan turned as the door opened. The smile wiped off his face at sight of Rip. We're looking for Mr. Grayson, he said brusquely. If you'd kept on coming, you'd have found him, Rip pointed out. He came out of the doorway and stepped aside with a wary nod of recognition at Katie Grayson, waiting for her to pass. But she stopped with her gray eyes on his bruised face, and her sympathy was instant. It did hurt you badly, didn't it? We thought you were dead and no one seemed to be able to do anything about it back there on the road. Father told me what you did and why you did it. Will you believe I'm awfully grateful? No one else would have thought of doing anything, I know. Rip smiled at her earnestness. I'm glad you made it here all right, ma'am. I'm fit and fine and going to work tonight. I reckon we'll both enjoy the birch a heap now that we're here. Hogan was impassive as Rip walked on out, but Rip had the feeling that the man's eyes followed him out. And when the dark evening closed around him outside, Rip spat. Just coming in, was he? And so far ahead of her she didn't see him until she got inside. The skunk eased in there and was listening. And I'd give a bar of that damn yellow gold to know how much he heard. Grayson can give orders from now till hell freezes over and it won't make that hombre like Rip Campbell. Or me like him. The mine shifts had changed. Food was being served in the bunkhouse again. Lighted lanterns on poles drove back the night inside the barbed wire. The thunder of the stamp mill beat endlessly over all other sounds. Lights in the mill shed and other buildings made the birch a gaudy, light-spangled scar against the vastness of the night. Out there in the night, death. And inside the barbed wire, a devil's brew of greed, fear and distrust. Rip grinned coldly as he strolled toward the mill building. About as bad as the Laguna Babacara country and old Tio Garcia's hate, he said to himself. All this needs is Juan Garcia around to stick a knife in my back, and hell would be calm and peaceful. Rip spat. And Juan won't be far behind. Rip, old son, you sure started gray hairs sprouting when you got off the main trail down there in Old Mexico. 2 hours later Rip was outside the wire doing night guard. 4 others were out there patrolling the wire. Not many, but they could give the alarm and throw a lead if anyone tried to rush the camp. They were afoot, so they could get back through the wire fast if they had to. One of the other guards, a bow-legged, hook-nosed desperado who said his name was Abe and let it go at that, was resentful at being forced out of the saddle. I ain't been so much on my feet since I was a kid. Gold money and plenty of it is all that'd keep me pushing my toes in the dirt all night long. It's a hell of a job. Don't get lined up long afore any of them lights, he warned Rip. We get shot up every now and then in the middle of the night just to keep us on our toes. They tie their horses out of hearing, sneak in close, fan a few shots, and give us a horse laugh as they leave. What does that get them? Rip demanded. There ain't any gold in that. "How the hell do I know?" Abe said viciously. "But it keeps us shot up and the whole damn camp worried up. Maybe they figure it keeps us softened up so we're easier meat when they make a jump after gold. If you ask me, they want the mine closed down and strangers out of this border country. Long as the mine is running, they never know what the law will decide to do. And they can't keep their hands off the gold as long as it's here for the taking. If I was sure I'd make more riding with them, I'd cash in here and look the wild bunch up. I reckon a heap of the boys feel the same way," Rip judged. "I reckon so. Why not? We're all looking for all we can get, ain't we?" "Seems so," Rip agreed. Chapter 7. For a time, laughter and some singing from men off duty came through the roar of machinery in the camp. But outside the wire the night brooded under the cold bright stars. Coyotes yapped and howled in the hills. Now and then the far howl of a big lofer wolf drifted on the night breeze. The water rushed and poured in the rocky little channel. Rip thought of Bull Grayson and his explanation of all this. The reasons he had given for the mine raids didn't make too much sense. Since when would outlaws rather close down a mine and stop future chances at the gold the mine might produce? Why should the Bascombe bunch go to all the trouble of picking off the guards at night and keeping the camp terrorized? Grayson had said there was nothing personal about it. Well, maybe. But now out in the night beyond the wire, Grayson's words became even less convincing. The more Rip thought about it, the less he liked the setup and the chore he'd let himself in for. But he'd passed his word and it was backed by the debt he owed Grayson. If it hadn't been for Grayson, they would probably have buried Rip Campbell quick back there in town, and young Juan Garcia would have headed back over the Rio Grande to boast far and wide that the Garcia dead was avenged. You owed a man something for saving your life. And when he put it up to you that he needed help, you couldn't shrug it aside. At least Rip Campbell couldn't, even when he knew the other man was skillfully hazing him around to repay the favor in this manner. Maybe, though, you couldn't blame Grayson for snatching at all the help he could get. He had a war bag full of trouble, and his daughter showing up the way she had, didn't make it any easier. Rip wondered about the gray-eyed girl who seemed as stubborn as her father. Had she known how bad things really were at the Birch when she left Three Forks? Probably she had. Rip guessed it wouldn't have made any difference. Probably have made her more determined to come. She was that much like her father. Rip considered her without any sentiment. She shared in the debt he owed her father. Helping her was helping Grayson. By tomorrow she'd be out of the picture. Grayson would pack her back to Three Forks in a hurry. And there you had a problem. If word could get out of the Birch camp about secret gold shipments, why couldn't it get out that Bull Grayson's daughter was in camp and fixing to travel back over the road on the morrow? And if word did get out to the Bascombe bunch, what would they be apt to do about it? Rip didn't know. He wished he did. He wasn't even sure that the stage holdup had any connection with the girl. Nobody could be sure except the men who had been there, and of those three, Jim Riley, and perhaps one of the other two, was dead by now. And if they hadn't known Katie Grayson was on the stage, they hadn't had a chance to find out during the fight. Once more Rip drifted out of the night and met the bull-legged Abe. "Anybody ever go out through the wire at night?" Rip inquired. "Hell, no. You figuring on catching someone at it?" "I was just making talk, I guess," Rip chuckled. "Your job," said Abe, "is to make sure the camp ain't jumped by surprise. With them damn stamps making so much noise most of the night, it ain't any trick for riders to come up in your face almost before you hear them. Keep watch on your share of the fence and you'll be doing enough to stay on the payroll." Abe was right according to the way he felt. The other guards probably felt the same way, and it would make spying on the mine easy. Information must be going out at night, before the racketing mill machinery closed down. The guards on the fence might know about it and might not. Rip had been assigned to that part of the fence nearest the road. The chances, he decided now, were not great that anyone would slip out through the wire on this side of the camp. Behind the camp was the steep mountain, the nearly inaccessible Little River Gorge. Rip stood in the starlight and surveyed the lay of the land as best he could. A man would not get anywhere at night by leaving the camp at the back. He'd go out one side or the other. On the right was a steep shoulder of the mountain around which the road had dropped to the mine. Hard climbing that way. But if a man slipped out the either side of the camp, he'd find an easy downgrade running alongside the road for almost a mile. He could cross the road at any point, and it would take him down in a deep thicket hollow, with another hard climb to get out the other side. But anywhere on down the road, one could wait at night and be out of sight of the camp. The guard on that side of the camp was Abe. The next time Rip met the bull-legged little Abe at the fence corner, he growled, "I've had a plenty hard day. Can't hardly stay awake. Any chance of a little sleep out somewhere without getting into trouble?" "It's been done, feller. Grayson and Hogan gets around now and then to see how things is going, but it's mostly after midnight. Get off somewhere now for 40 winks and you won't be caught. Abe spat. If you kind of drop out of the way a little, and anybody shows up, I'll tell them I just seen you. What the hell does it matter? Thanks, Rip said. As he walked away in the night, his smile was cold. Grayson's gold could buy powder, drills, shovels, guns, and men to work them. But the one thing needed in a setup like this, he didn't have. Grayson had to have loyalty, and he didn't have loyalty and never would have with the kind of man his gold kept up here at the mine. Rip stopped when he was out of sight of Abe. He waited until the other guard would be toward the back of the camp. Then he returned to the fence corner and kept on going into the night on the side of the camp that Abe was watching. Beyond the strip of cleared ground, Rip vanished in the undergrowth, moved warily and carefully to the road, and kept going. The camp lights dropped back. The sound of the mill machinery grew fainter. The cool clean quiet night enveloped Rip as he walked halfway to the shoulder of the mountain, and then a little farther, and turned off into the undergrowth. He sat down against a small tree and relaxed. The stamp mill roar was a murmur now. No one could approach the mine from this direction without being heard. Rip waited patiently, fighting off drowsiness that came with the quiet. Hours passed and nothing happened. Maybe nothing would happen tonight. Maybe he was on the wrong track. But if he'd sized things up right, word would be passing out about Grayson's daughter and the safe arrival of the man who'd stopped the stage hold-up and killed Jim Riley. The border and the outlaw country were on this side. Anyone approaching the mine from this direction or anyone heading out from the mine would have to pass near this point. Half an hour later Rip jerked his head up as a faint sound drifted from the south. It came again. He eased stiffly to his feet, chambered a shell in the rifle, made sure his holstered 6-gun was loose and ready. A horse was coming toward the mine at a slow, cautious walk. Crouching behind a bush, Rip watched. There was enough starlight to reveal the dark bulk of the rider, who seemed to be peering into the undergrowth as he passed. Rip drew a slow breath of satisfaction. He'd hit a bullseye. When the rider was past, Rip eased out of the undergrowth and followed. He shifted the rifle to his left hand and drew the 6-gun. If he was spotted, gun talk would come first and questions later. He had almost decided to hail the man and try to pass himself off as the one from the mine, but that was running the odds too fine that he would have any luck finding out who was expected from the mine. The slow-walking horse moved on ahead toward the mine lights. The machinery roared louder. Then the horse stopped and the rider dismounted. Rip stopped and began to stalk the spot a step at a time. Presently he caught the sound of cautious voices. He thought he could make out the horse, but the starlight was too faint to be sure. The two men standing at the edge of the road were invisible. Rip hooked a thumb over the 6-gun hammer and made each step with care. The horse moved restlessly. Bit chains jingled softly. Then the horse's bulk loomed just ahead, and an impatient voice lifted slightly. "Who gives a damn about that part of it? You heard what was wanted. Sounds like a fool trick to me." A second voice grumbled. "I don't know whether I want any of it or not. You better listen." "Damn listening. Lee knows what he wants, and what he says goes unless you're willing to stand up with gun talk and have it out with him. You got that on your mind?" "I never said so. But we got plenty to think of around the mine here. If he was to get an idea of this, he'd go crazy without calling his first shots. Tell it to Lee. I'm only bringing you what he said. What'll I tell him back?" "Anything you damn please. That ain't what Lee'll want to hear." "All right," the other man growled after a moment. "Tell him okay, if he wants it that way." Rip didn't recognize the voice. But then he'd heard few voices at the mine and these two men were talking in slurred, low tones. He wasn't close enough yet to have much luck with a gun. A couple of dozen steps more and he'd have a chance. Then the horse tossed its head, snorted, changed position restlessly. Rip could almost see the pricked ears of the horse, and its eyes staring warily at the intruder slipping close in the dark. Rip had been afraid just this might happen. He ran at the men, and a harsh voice blurted, "There's one of them in the road." The horse bolted toward Rip. A gun spit livid flame at him. His own 6 blasted back as he jumped aside. The horse flashed past like a destructive shadow, its rider lacing the night with a drum roll of shots and Rip firing back. And Rip was sure he hit the man, for the other gun stopped firing. The mad run of the horse went on down the road, and if the rider had been knocked out of the saddle he left no sign of it. Rip had jumped to the edge of the undergrowth. Now with his gun almost empty, he crouched for half a dozen breaths, waiting for the second man to show his hand. But the second man had vanished. The shattering reports of the gun's bad covered his movements. Ears ringing with gunfire echoes and the pound of the retreating horse, Rip could catch no sign of the man. He might be a dozen feet away or a dozen yards away. Silently Rip cursed himself for a weakness he never had been able to help. He could have put lead in the running horse. But he'd never yet shot a horse down to get at the rider. Something always stopped him. At the moment of firing he would always think that the horse couldn't help its rider and didn't deserve killing, and he'd try to get the rider instead. Quietly Rip reloaded. He moved toward the spot where the two men had been standing, and nothing happened. Now the horse was almost out of hearing. The noise of the mine machinery drifted clearly once more. The camp would have heard the shooting. The guards, Grayson, some of the men would be out to see what had happened. If that second man wasn't hiding nearby, he was making his way through the undergrowth back to camp. Rip turned toward camp and ran hard on the road. This way, running fast, he still had a chance to get back to the wire before the fellow slipped through. Rip was panting when he reached the belt of cleared ground outside the wire. The twinkling mine lights looked close and bright, and the unending hammer of the stamps was loud and friendly as Rip cut over from the road toward the wire. Abe would be there in the darkness somewhere, and other men, too. Rip was halfway across the cleared space when a gun opened up behind him. A shout that followed a burst of two shots rang loudly and clearly. "There he is! Get him!" The gun opened up again. The man who was firing it had run out of the undergrowth as Rip cut over the open ground from the road. It was probably one of the guards. "Abe!" Rip yelled. "That vo, Abe?" A bullet whistled past his ear. He fired back and retreated toward the wire. The other man came on after him. Rip damned the night that hid faces and got everything mixed up like this. The man they wanted would dodge away and get back safely into camp. Just then a second gun farther back in the cleared swath opened up in Rip's direction. Swearing, Rip ran toward the wire. He was challenged loudly. "I see you coming. Speak out. Who is it?" It was Abe standing near the wire. "Don't shoot." Rip called back. "This is Campbell. Come up and show yourself, Campbell. I'm after a fellow who met someone down the road. There's a chance to grab him if he ain't got back already." "Who did that shooting down the road?" Abe demanded, as Rip came up. "I did," Rip panted. "Two of them was talking. One got away on a horse. The other came back here. I'm trying to head him off." Abe moved close and his gun shoved against Rip's side. "I heard you coming at a fast run," Abe said coldly. "But damned if it looked like you was following anybody. Who is it came after you with the gun?" "Take that gun out of my ribs," Rip said violently. "I thought it might be you, not knowing who you was shooting at." "Who went out there?" Abe jabbed harder. "Drop them guns quick, Campbell. I ain't taking chances. You fool." Rip raged. "I haven't got time to mess up in a mistake like this." "Who said it was a mistake? Are you gonna drop them guns and reach up? Last chances." The 6-gun and rifle hit the ground by Rip's feet. He lifted his hands. Abe was a man to do just what he threatened. "I got him!" Abe yelled. "Over here. Hold off on that shooting." Now men were running toward the spot inside the wire. The one who had shot at Rip came running across the cleared ground, panting. "Hold him. I got him cold." "What it's all about?" Abe demanded. The man plunged up to them. He was short like Abe. He gasped for breath, before biting out. "I followed him down the road to where he made a talk with one of the Bascom bunch. They heard me move and started to shoot. The Bascom one hightailed off on a horse. I chased this feller back here." "Who in the hell is he, anyway?" "Campbell," Abe answered. "The one who come in this afternoon and had a fight with Hogan. I might have known it. He looked wrong when he rode that horse in. The talk that started about him hit the nail on the head, didn't it? Hell, we might as well kill him right now and get it over with. The men will hang him for pulling a trick like this." "Plain enough now." Rip recognized the voice. Rip made him out as the small, shrewd-faced, red-haired man who had tripped him during that fight with Dan Hogan. The red-haired man was set for a killing before others ducking through the triple wire fencing got to them. Chapter 8. Abe's gun hard against his side, Rip tensed to make a fight of it. At that moment Bull Grayson's shout lifted a few yards away. "What's all this about? What have you men got there?" The redhead swore under his breath and hesitated. That instant of waiting was enough for Bull Grayson to reach them. Abe explained to Grayson. "Got a hombre who slipped down the road for a talk with one of the Bascom bunch. Cole Young here caught him at it and chased him back. I collared him when he ran up. It's Campbell, the one that was put watching the wire out there along the road." Bull Grayson's ball of anger blasted over them. "Campbell? Damn it, it'll go hard if it's so. Campbell, what about it?" "A damn lie and a slick trick, I'll give him that." Rip bit back. "I was the one who caught him talking to the Bascom man. When the shooting down the road was over, the Bascom man got away on his horse and I headed back fast to the wire to stop the feller who went out from the mine on foot. He beat me back and turned the dirt on me. A dozen men were swarming through the wire to the spot and more were coming. Armed men, muttering with anger as they heard what had happened. "String the dirty pup up," one called out. "Yeah, somebody get a rope." "Never mind talking about a rope," Grayson ordered. "There won't be anybody strung up before I know who's guilty. And then I'm man enough to hand out all that's needed." Grayson spat. His voice grew ugly. "We know damn well someone here's guilty. But one of you ain't. Which one? How much proof you got to have?" The red-haired young asked, complainingly. "Me, I've been scouting outside the wire night after night. Abe told me tonight he seen someone sneaking off down the road. So I followed to see what was up. And when I butted into them and chased the feller back here to camp, and fanned him right up to the wire with my gun, what else do you want? Abe will tell you how I followed Campbell. Wasn't that you shooting at him off to the left there, Mr. Grayson?" "Yes, it was," Grayson assented grimly. "Abe, how about this story?" "You heard it," Abe said readily. "Young and I were hunkered down over there near the road having a smoke, and I heard someone sneaking past down the road. Young said he'd look into it and followed. I didn't have no idea it was Campbell. Just before that, Campbell had told me he was plenty tired out and might be catching himself a little sleep. It looked to me like maybe someone had sneaked out his side of the fence." "Asleep?" Grayson said angrily. "While he was supposed to be doing guard on the fence. Campbell, is that true?" "I did talk of some sleep," Rip admitted. "But I was laying to move on down the road and see what might happen tonight. And plenty happened, the way I told it. You've just heard two of the slickest liars that ever thought fast. They're pulling together like a match team on it, so both must have had a hand in it. I've killed men for calling me less than a liar," warned Abe past clenched teeth. "And right here's where." "Don't throw that gun on him," Grayson blared. "Put a gun in my hand and give him a chance," Rip invited. "They've got one yarn. I've got another. We'll see who's right." A man in the back of the gathering crowd of miners called. "That's just a slick trick to get him a gun and a chance to run for it. Hell, didn't he ride an outlaw horse in here today? Ain't it plain them gunmen this afternoon give him a horse to ride in here and get set for a dirty trick? And the first night he goes to work and does it. Pete Jensen's went for a rope." Another one called. They were a dark, uneasy mass of angered men crowding close. Nerves were keyed up, tempers flaring. A few more of the right words would set them off like sparks in an open can of blasting powder. Rip had seen crowds go out of control before. He'd come out of Mexico ahead of a mob that had been inflamed by the Garcia. Now two men that this crowd knew were calmly swearing his life away. He'd gotten the information that Bull Grayson wanted, and the pay was being tendered in death instead of gold. The grim humor of it made Rip smile bitterly while his mind raced. He could see there was not a chance of making a break. He didn't want to, anyway. Running away would only mark him with the guilt he was denying. He had to talk them out of it, a stranger's word against that of two men who had been among them day after day. And the ugly mood of the listeners made that almost impossible. Rip lifted his voice. "Anybody here who don't want to see justice done? We'll give you justice." Cole Young snapped from where he stood at Grayson's elbow. But other men called, "Sure, we want the right man. What do you call justice, stranger? If you was innocent, you'd get all the chance you needed." "All right," said Rip. "I only reached your damn mine late this afternoon. I came from town where I've been laid up in bed for weeks. Grayson himself asked me to come here and take a job. I never heard of this mine until he spoke to me about it." "Grayson, how about it?" "They're fair facts and right," Grayson admitted. "I was the one who met you and got you to come here. If I rode into camp and made a deal in a few hours with somebody outside of camp," Rip asked ironically, "then who in the hell has been selling out to the best comb bunch before I showed up? You can't pin dirt on me that was done while I was laid up helpless in a bed." The silence that followed might have meant anything. The ugly mood of the crowd was still heavy, electric. Abe broke the silence with a brittle challenge. "We're talking about tonight. And there ain't any." "Shut up," Bull Grayson told his hired gunman with grim finality. "I'm thinking about more than tonight. Campbell is right. Plenty happened around here before I ever bumped into him in town. He couldn't have had a hand in any of that. It's been going on all the time. Common sense says what was done tonight wasn't done by a new hand at it. I should have thought of that." "That's straight thinking, boss," a calm voice behind Grayson said. "Campbell would have been a fool to have rode that horse into camp here if he was guilty of anything. He could have turned the horse loose a couple of miles away and walked in after dark. I've noticed it's most generally the innocent man who looks worse when there's some slick lying going on." That voice belonged to Leo Calhoun, the big good-natured bearded miner who had been friendly to Rip after the fight with Dan Hogan. And Calhoun had struck the mood of the crowd, Or at least found men who respected his way of thinking. Calhoun is right. Sure thing, another agreed. We ain't getting justice done hanging this new man. Maybe he ain't any good, but he sounds good the way he explains this. Is anybody calling me a liar? Cole Young demanded angrily. Didn't you hear? Said Rip. I called you and your sidekick both liars. I'll say it again and back it up with a gun. None of that, I said. Bull Grayson exploded. You all know the rule against gunplay here among ourselves. Young, Abe, you two put those guns up and get away from Campbell. There's been a mix-up here that won't be settled with two different sets of stories. So I'm going to call it all off. Nobody got hurt. We'll go back to my orders that nobody goes outside the wire at night. That goes for the three of you, Campbell, Abe, Young. If anyone, or all of you, don't like it, I'll pay off tonight or tomorrow and you can get going. Suits me, said Rip curtly. It don't suit me, said Cole Young shortly. But I'm staying just to see this straightened out. Me, too, said Abe sourly. All of you back inside the wire then, Grayson ordered. You three men, too. I'll put new guards out tonight in your places. Back in, men. It's all over. The hell it's over, someone said caustically. Them three will take care of that. It ought to be good when they pay each other off. Chapter 9. Grayson must have had his reasons for not asking further questions at once. Rip expected them, but the mine owner said nothing more to him. And the crowd broke up, seemingly to agree with the man who expected more trouble between Rip and the other two. Abe and Cole Young stalked off toward the bunkhouse. Big Leo Calhoun fell into step beside Rip. Plenty of trouble, huh, Campbell? Seems so, Rip agreed. Thanks for speaking up. I needed a good word. I figured so, Leo Calhoun said laconically. For a minute I wondered if anybody would be able to stop it in time. He spat. I knew where the truth was as soon as I found who was calling the other fellow a liar. Ain't this camp in a dirty mess? One of these nights hell is going to bust right through that fancy fence wire and clean everything out. Got any reason for being so sure about it? Just the way things is going, my friend. Word has been sent in time and again that any man working for Bull Grayson is cold meat if he's caught outside the camp. I've got a hunch that Lee Bascom is trying to make the place so unhealthy that Grayson will find himself short of men some week. Then it'll happen. It ought to be something to write home about if it does happen, Rip said thoughtfully. Don't be afraid it won't, Leo Calhoun said confidently. I look for Lee Bascom to try and bust open the powder house and blow up the mine. And I'm only hoping I ain't back in the tunnel when it happens. I'm a hard rock man, but I don't hanker to lay in seep water and pitch black cold inside a mountain while I take a week or so to die. And it'll be just my luck to do so. This is my day off, but I go back on the night shift tomorrow. You didn't hear what was said down the road there to the Bascom man, did you? I didn't get close enough to hear much of anything, Rip said briefly. Leo Calhoun hesitated. What I'm going to say now ain't any of my business. Campbell. You probably know it already. But if I was you, I'd climb that big pretty-looking stallion you rode in today and leave. I'd do it tonight. I'd do it as fast as I could hang a saddle on that horse. You've got two hard and ornery hombres laying for you now. A man can't watch his back 24 hours a day. I'll be a fool not to leave, Rip agreed soberly. But I'm staying over a little to see what happens. Chances are they won't make a move tonight while I'm catching a little sleep in the bunkhouse. Everybody'll be watching for them to try it. And tomorrow's another day. Uh-huh, Leo Calhoun agreed. And around here a new day is apt to be more trouble. Well, if you stay, your eyes is wide open about it. Rip was weary and stiff when he entered the bunkhouse where thick-muscled miners were snoring heavily. He put his rifle and gun belt on the inside of his bunk, and when he was in that top bunk under the blankets, he slid the keen stiletto sent him by Juan Diego de Garcia down beside his leg where his hand could touch it instantly. He smiled, thinking that the blade of the Garcia might protect Rip Campbell. Then he noticed that Leo Calhoun had strolled in and seated himself on a box under the dim oil lamp hanging in the center of the long room. The big bearded miner was calmly smoking a short-stemmed pipe. He looked as if he might sit there a long time tonight. It looked as though Calhoun was sitting there, silent and watchful, to see that Rip Campbell slept safely. Now and then you ran across men like Calhoun, honest, square, quick to help a man who was in a tight. Bull Grayson in town had seemed like that. Now Rip wasn't sure of anything about Grayson. He had expected that mine owner to approach him with further questions tonight. Rip tried to figure out why, in the few moments before heavy sleep claimed him. Sometime during the night the noisy hammer of the stamp mill stopped and the night shift came off work. Rip roused briefly as the night miners began to straggle to their bunks. Then, before he knew it, the sun was bright, Machinery was hammering again, and the birch sounded like any other busy mining camp. At noon Katie Grayson still had not started back to Three Forks. And Bull Grayson had made no move to probe further into what had happened last night. Cole Young and Abe were keeping away from Rip. Which might mean anything. By afternoon it was evident that Grayson's daughter must be staying over another day. Rip stopped at the stable for the third time during the day to feast his eyes on the big, cream-colored stallion. Junior Stern joined him outside the corral and smiled as he followed Rip's gaze inside. "Plenty come to look at him," said the hustler. "By golly, they never see such a horse, I tell you. Me, I give 1 damn year's pay for him if I ever have so much pay." Rip fingered tobacco into a paper and rolled a cigarette. "He ain't for sale. I wonder where Jim Riley got him. Last night I remember something I hear ones," said Junior Stern. "This horse belonged to a Rico Grande, what you say? A great man in Mexico. Jim killed him just to get this horse. Now Jim is dead, too. Maybe for this horse so big, so beautiful, death is the price, eh? Death is the one price greater than money, my friend." Rip chuckled. "Maybe so. But I wasn't after this horse when I shot Riley. Ain't he a beauty, though? He rides like a cloud and runs like the wind, and if he ever gets tired, he didn't show it on the way here." Junior Stern rolled a cigarette, too. The rugged tilt of his smile was shaded with doubt. "See, a beauty, senor. Such a beauty that the devil must see him long ago. I don't know, maybe I'd like to own this horse, after all." "You ain't going to get the chance," Rip said, and turned as his name was called. It was Grayson. With him was Dan Hogan, and walking between them was a ragged Mexican leading a bony old mule that had a sheepskin tied on for a saddle, a bridle mended with old rope, and reins of rope. "This here man," said Grayson brusquely as he came up, "rode here to leave a note. The men brought him to me. He claims he was stopped by strange men who ordered him to ride here for them. This is for you, Campbell." Rip opened the folded, crumpled sheet of wrapping paper. A pencil had crudely printed, "Send my big star horse back with this man or I'll kill the hombre who's got him. Maybe I will anyway for shooting at me. Jim Riley." Rip whistled softly. "So Jim ain't dead, after all?" "Evidently not," Grayson said grimly. "He won't get the horse by sending for him," Rip declared. "I got the horse just like Riley did, and I'll keep him the same way." "Was that what you wanted to hear?" "You're the one to decide," said Grayson. "It's your horse as long as you can back it up." "I'll try," said Rip, and turned to the man on the horse. "Savvy?" Unshaven, stoop-shouldered, vacant-eyed, the man carried a ragged old straw sombrero in his hand and looked stupid as he shrugged and shook his head. Rip spoke in Spanish. "Ride back and say that another owns the horse now." The man ducked his head humbly. "Si, senor," he muttered. Hogan's smile was hard under his black mustache. "This'll mean more trouble for us to worry about," he said to Grayson. "Riley won't let it go at this. I've heard he's killed 3 men in getting that damn horse, the owner and 2 men who were riding with him. Riley will have the animal back one way or another if he has to start killing again to do it." "Mister," said Rip mildly, "I don't know as much about Riley as you seem to, but I'm keeping the horse until he comes after it. Riley and I will talk about that stage hold-up first. If that don't suit the birch mine, I'll ride on." "That's all I wanted to know," said Grayson. "Hogan, take this man to the gate and send him on his way." With ill grace, Hogan walked off with the ragged man. Junior Stern caught Rip's eye and flashed white teeth in a wry smile. "No, I don't think I want that horse, amigo. His price is still death, eh?" Chapter 10. "Step over here, Campbell," Grayson said. When they were off to themselves, the mine owner stared for a moment, hands on his hips, and then demanded, "Do you know who Riley is?" Rip nodded. "And you're ready to tangle with him?" "Why not? Campbell, you're a hard case." "I never figured so." "You are," Grayson said. "You proved it last night. And I'm satisfied now that I can trust you." "How am I supposed to feel about that?" Rip asked with a trace of sarcasm. Grayson's gesture was impatient. "Considering what I'm up against. Campbell, my trusting a man says a lot." "I suppose so," Rip conceded. "What about Hogan? You trust him plenty, I reckon?" Grayson's cold gray eyes stared for a moment before he nodded. "Campbell, when the day comes that I can't trust Hogan, I'll know there's not much use trying to keep the mine open. If I can't trust Hogan, I'll never be able to trust any man. And that," remarked Rip, "is saying a lot." "That's the way it is," Grayson said. "I'm sorry you and Hogan got off on the wrong foot. Hogan's a good hater and bound to run things when he can. Yesterday he thought you were in the wrong and backed it up his way." Grayson paused, Considering. Maybe Hogan hasn't changed his mind about you, but he'll take my orders about it. So forget him. Rip changed the subject without committing himself. Was that what you wanted to say? At the moment, said Grayson, it is. I just wanted you to know that I'm trusting you in anything that comes up. I want you to know that you're among a very few whom I'm depending on. Thanks, said Rip. You ain't wrong about it. But you didn't show it by not asking more about what happened down the road last night. I've been hiding what I believed last night, Grayson said coolly. I'm giving out plenty of rope and hoping those two will get reckless or hurried and hang themselves. I wanted to find out who they talk to and what they do. Did anything more happen last night that I should know about? Maybe not, said Rip. Lee Bascombe sent word for Young to do something that Young didn't have stomach to try. He tried to back out. The Bascombe man told him it'd mean gunplay with Bascombe if he didn't go through with it. What was it? Grayson asked quickly. I'd like to know. Young said it'd start you shooting fast if you found out. He just agreed to do it, when the Bascombe man's horse spotted me and hell was all over the road. I'd run them two snakes out of camp, if I was you. They're up to something dirty. I've had plenty of it all along, Grayson growled. I guess I can handle this. Are you up to a hard fast ride? On Riley's horse I am. Any horse you'll like, said the mine owner. Better go over your guns and draw more ammunition if you need it. I want you ready if I call on you. Grayson turned on his heel and walked away. His shoulders were back, head was up, and he was scowling thoughtfully. Rip watched him go and reached for the tobacco sack again. So Grayson trusted Hogan above all others? Yesterday Cole Young had hurried in to see Hogan while Rip was dismounting beside the mine office. Young had carried word of the stranger's arrival, and Hogan had come to the office door primed for trouble. Young had edged forward in the crowd and tripped Rip during the fight. Young and Hogan were evidently thick. How did that stack up beside Grayson's feeling about Hogan and the fact that Cole Young was linked with the Bascombe bunch? Then Katie Grayson had all but stumbled over Hogan listening in the outer office while Grayson was talking to Rip. The amused voice of Junior Stern spoke behind Rip. I think I study hard too if Jim Riley sent for my horse. Rip turned with a faint smile. Who wouldn't be scared green? What do you know about Hogan? Junior Stern spread his hands out open and empty as he shrugged. Any reason why Hogan and this Cole Young should be good friends? Rip questioned. No savvy. You ain't any good to me, Rip said good-naturedly. Sure, I know, I'm just a horse hand, said Junior Stern with a flash of white teeth. Now I ask you something about that Pilato what come here. His mule ready to fall down. His old clothes almost fall off. His whiskers too, 3 days old. You bet me he don't have 10 centavos to spend, huh? I reckon not, agreed Rip. Who he is? What he do to eat and live? Junior Stern asked with a peculiar smile. How do I know who he is? Maybe he's got a little shack and some sheep or goats somewhere or works around. He work to live, huh? I reckon so. It don't rain grub in these parts more than once a year. What are you driving at? Nothing, said Junior Stern. But his hands, amigo, so soft and fine like one of the gentle people. His hands don't do a peon's work. His feet don't walk right in those huaraches he wear. His feet too small, like one of the gentle people. And his eyes don't miss nothing, I tell you, that damn Pilato. Why in the hell didn't you say some of that while he was here? Junior Stern shrugged. I am paid to watch horses, he remarked. What I do to put my face in the big boss's business. If he ask me, I say so. If he don't ask, Junior Stern watched the horses. Rip made a break for the front of the camp. But when he got there the ragged man and his mule were not in sight. He kicked that bag of bones into a run down the road, a guard at the gate said. I've had a smoke since he's been out of sight. Rip swore under his breath. The cream stallion could catch the old mule if one could be sure where the mule had gone. But Bascombe's men might be waiting just out of sight. They might be hoping such a full move would be made. Reluctantly Rip abandoned the idea. But it made a man feel sheepish to know that one of the Bascombe bunch had ridden in under their noses and ridden safely out again. And it left Rip wondering whether Riley's horse had been all the man had come for. The afternoon dragged to the steady roar of the stamp mill. Little ore cars trundled out of the mine and dumped rock clattering into the ore bins. Gray-black smoke drifted in an uneasy plume from the black boiler stack. Far back in the mountain, one knew, lights were flickering dimly and the damp blackness where sweating men ripped out the high-grade rock. Out here in the sunlight men were busy at the mill. The night shift men were waiting to take their turn at labor. Nothing about all this should make a man nervous. This was a rich gold camp. It should be solid, safe with the might, the power of yellow gold. But it wasn't safe and everyone in the camp knew it. Under the bright blaze of the brassy sun, fear hung like the everlasting dust around the mill stamps. Fear of what might strike from outside the wire, suspicion of others inside the wire. Rip walked about. He caught men eyeing him furtively. He noticed stares that lacked friendliness. Leo Calhoun gave him the answer. "Word has traveled around," explained Calhoun, "that we'll have more trouble over the horse you rode on here. Some of the men are still mixed up about last night. They ain't sure about you. Hell, they ain't sure about anyone around here. A couple of weeks makes them mighty jumpy. They get so they expect anything and believe anything. I take it there's been no move from them two skunks who double-crossed you last night?" "Not yet," said Rip. "It'll come," Calhoun warned. "It'll come and there won't be no warning." "I'd give a heap for 2 pairs of eyes," Rip admitted, smiling thinly. "But I'll try to make out. How come Hogan stands so high with Grayson?" "You ain't the only one who's wondered," said Calhoun. "I'm one of the oldest men here now. Hogan was here when I come. I've seen things that would indicate Hogan and Grayson ain't exactly crazy about each other. But mostly they run along together like a bull and a bear caught in a forest fire and no time for personal fights." "Funny," mused Rip. "Damn funny," Calhoun agreed. "But you get used to expecting anything around here." Rip could believe it. He found his own nerves tightening, his attention sharp, a feeling going with him that anything might happen at any time. Half an hour before the night shift was due to troop back in the tunnel, Grayson's hail brought Rip around near the mill. Grayson came striding hurriedly. "Saddle up, Campbell. As soon as I get out the dynamite for the night shift, I'm starting a fast buggy and guards for Three Forks." The sun had slid down behind the mountain. The first steel-gray somberness of twilight was moving into the sky. "Night trip, huh?" said Rip, looking at the sky. "I reckon we're taking the young lady back?" Grayson frowned and nodded almost reluctantly, as if he hated to talk about the matter. "She's got to go back fast, Campbell. A night ride will be safest. No one has any idea but what she's staying on. I'm taking the gold on hand also, and men whom I think I can trust. No one else knows we're leaving. There won't be a chance for word to get out until we're well on our way. 4 horses to a light buggy will travel faster than we can be caught." Grayson's face darkened. Then, he finished grimly, "With the gold on hand out of the way and my daughter safe, we'll have a showdown. I'm bringing back every gunman money we'll hire. I'll have them deputized. I'll rawhide Bascom and his wolves until they're killed or run out of these parts." "You're on the right track," Rip approved. "I've been wondering why you didn't use some of your gold that way long ago." "A good reason," said Grayson. "Bascom can call on 20 or 30 outlaws. Maybe more. A showdown fight to clean out the country between here and the border will bring more gunmen to help Bascom. They can't afford to be run out of this border strip. They'd never be as safe anywhere else." "It's a hell of a job at that," Rip agreed. "Maybe I'd have strung wire and set tight like you did." "It didn't work," confessed Grayson. "They're bleeding me to death. Now I'll jump them while I've got the gold to give me a chance." Grayson slammed a clenched fist into a palm. "We'll get the gold out safely and bring men back. So get ready to ride." Grayson started to turn away. Then they both stood rooted to the spot as 2 fast gunshots knifed thinly through the stamp mill racket. Grayson's hand went instinctively to the gun at his side as he broke into a run toward the spot. Rip followed at his heels. Chapter 11. The shots had been fired at the back of the camp, where the wire enclosure reached into the rocky little canyon which spawned the mountain stream. The hammering steel stamps had all but blotted out the gunshots. As he started to run, Rip noticed a man or two staring curiously. But that was all. No one else seemed to know that anything was wrong, and it would take time to spread an alarm. But Rip knew why Grayson was bolting like a wild man toward the sound of the shots. Back there in the little canyon, around a jutting shoulder of rock from the camp, and the mine workings, was where the powder stores were kept. In the rock side of the narrow little canyon an old prospector's tunnel had been enlarged into a storeroom. A solid steel inner door was fronted by the wooden outer door, each triple locked, with a man on guard night and day. 2 steel rails ran from the powder room to the mine tunnel. Explosives were loaded on one of the little ore cars as needed and rolled to the mine. Now Grayson was running toward trouble near the stored explosives. A shoulder of rock at the canyon entrance cut off view of the spot. If the stored explosives went off, it would shake the mountain, demolish the camp, kill, maim, stun all men nearby. Rip drew his gun as he ran. He was at Grayson's heels as they bolted around the shoulder of rock and saw the steel rails stretching up the canyon. On the left the canyon side was steep, brush-covered. On the right rocks and brush covered a rough, low bank beside the cold swift water of the little stream. The track had a slight upgrade. One of the ore cars was coasting slowly down the grade toward them. And up at the end of the track where the explosives were stored in the living rock, four men were standing. Rip recognized the stooped, gray-haired bookkeeper and two miners in overalls with their hands in the air. Abe had them cowed with a 6-gun. He fired a shot down the track as Rip and Grayson dashed into view. Then a jump put Abe behind his three prisoners where he was safe from flying lead. At that moment Cole Young backed out of the powder room, paying out line from a coil that hung over his arm. He saw Rip and Grayson and went hurriedly about what he was doing without drawing his gun. Abe fired again. Grayson did not stop. An oath burst from Rip as he realized what Cole Young was doing. That coil over the red-headed gunman's arm wasn't rope. That coil was fuse that Young was laying from the explosive room. Abe yelled something. Cole Young dropped the fuse, slammed the massive wooden door, went to his knees, grabbed up the end of the fuse and struck a match. That told its own story. Lee Bascom had ordered all this. Rip could see the dead guard lying where Abe and Young had shot him down. Now Abe was shooting past the prisoners. Here in the canyon it was quieter. Rip heard the loud whang of a bullet smashing through the thin steel side of the slow-rolling little ore car. The two miners sprawled down on the ground. The bookkeeper started to follow. Abe yanked him up, held him for a shield and aimed carefully again. Another bullet smashed into the ore car. "Why don't the dirty skunks stand out alone and fight?" Grayson cried with furious helplessness. Abe snatched a rifle off the ground as Grayson shot twice. The little bookkeeper staggered and fell. Abe whipped the rifle up to his shoulder. "Get down, Grayson," Rip yelled. "He ain't shooting at us. That ore car must have dynamite in it. He's trying to blow it up and he can't miss with that rifle." Rip leapt off the track and went flat, sprawling to the ground amid the rocks and bushes. Grayson halted. Standing there, he emptied his 6-gun so fast the shots made one burst of sound. Only then did Grayson get off the track and go to the ground some yards ahead. Rip lifted his head. Abe was weaving, obviously hit hard. But he got the rifle against his shoulder and fired. And the world blew up in a crashing, gigantic, thundering roar of sound that deafened, crushed, unmercifully beat at the senses. It was as if the hand of a mighty giant had slammed down a destructive force. The little steel ore car dissolved in a sheet of flame and smoke. The force of the explosion beat Rip hard against the ground, crushed at his ears. For a terrible moment breath was torn away. Then the clattering rain of debris started. Rocks, metal, bits of bushes and trees showered down. Ears deafened by the blast could barely make out the rumble of bigger rocks as they rolled down the steep canyon side. Instinctively Rip shielded his head with his arms. It was no protection if a big rock struck him, but it was all he could do. Small fragments pelted him. One great boulder crashed over the mine track, missed his head by less than a yard and bounded into the creek. His face was rawhided by the rock fragments it struck off in passing. A small avalanche poured down near the spot where the ore car had exploded. Rip remembered Grayson and struggled up. The mine owner lay there half buried by the rocks. Bright blood was flowing over the side of Grayson's face. He was motionless when Rip reached him. And on up the track where the powder room door was closed and the lighted fuse was burning, only Cole Young was on his feet. And Young looked unsteady, as if he, too, had been hurt by the explosion. Rip had instinctively held onto his gun. Now he broke into a lurching run toward Young. Young fired at him. The small gunman's face was snarling. His bullet must have passed close, but Rip didn't think about it. His mind was on the awful thought of what would follow when the fuse burned into the powder room. Young fired again and again, and Rip held the dog-weaving run toward him, holding shots until he got close. Young's gun emptied. He started to reload and then suddenly turned and ran up the canyon. The shots Rip fired missed and the gunman vanished in the underbrush. Only Young knew how long the fuse would take to burn, and he was running. Rip wanted to turn and run the other way. He was still trembling from the ore car blast. Thought of a far mightier explosion made nerves crawl helplessly. But there was still a chance to do something. Rip kept on. He was still many yards away when one of the miners staggered up to the powder room door, stooped, caught the fuse in both hands and jerked back with all his strength. The fuse broke. Blood was streaming down into the miner's right eye and he was dashing it away with the back of his hand and feverishly examining the end of the fuse when Rip ran up. In that instant the fuse spit fire from the end. The miner hurled it down. His clear eye seemed to be bulging in the socket. "Got it just in time," he blurted hoarsely. A few seconds more and it had been too late. He locked the damn door. Cole Young had slammed the massive wooden door and snapped one of the triple locks. The fuse led under the locked door. No power on earth could have stopped an explosion by the time Rip would have reached the spot. "Mister," Rip said weakly, "you sure carry a rabbit's foot. Ain't it the truth? Something hit me on the head and knocked me clean out." First thing I thought of when my eyes opened was that fuse. What's the matter with Bill there? Bill was the other miner, a big, broad-chested, powerful man, who lay doubled up on the ground, groaning, holding his middle. Bill spoke thickly as Rip bent over him. I tried to get up and he shot me. Why'd I ever come to this hell spot anyway? A shrill, panic-stricken falsetto broke out on Rip's left. Oh, Lord, let me get away from here and I'll never be back. It's hell and the devil stays here. The gold's cursed and we're all damned for trying to get it out. Oh, Lord, let me live to get away from here. The thin, elderly stoop-shouldered bookkeeper was ashen-faced, shaking, as he stood there crying dazedly. The Lord's done his share of helping you just now, buddy. Rip reminded him. Don't ask for more favors before you earn them. Get back to camp and crawl under your desk and keep quiet. He had to shake the bookkeeper's shoulder before the man drew a shuddering breath, looked helplessly at him, and then broke into a stumbling run down the track. You look after this man while I see to Grayson, Rip told the miner. He's hurt bad. How about the dirty killer? He won't be back, guessed Rip. The men will tear him to pieces if they catch him. Here they come now. Men had burst into view from the camp. Leo Calhoun was one of them. He reached Bull Grayson a few seconds before Rip got to the spot. What in hell happened? Calhoun demanded. Rip told them as he helped move Grayson's inert body. We should have hanged them last night and had it over with, Calhoun said angrily. Looks like this blood on Grayson's face is where a rock struck his head. Is he breathing? Rip felt inside Grayson's shirt and nodded. His heart's still going. I don't know whether he's shot or not. Better get him to the office. Can't do anything here. Another one up the track there is shot. I think Grayson killed that bull-legged Abe. I hope so. The dirty snake lived long enough to set off a car loaded with dynamite. There was no lack of help. Brawny miners locked hands under Grayson's body, lifted him as gently as they could, and started down the track. Dan Hogan came running to meet them. Rip stopped and outlined what had happened. Now Hogan was not smiling under his black mustache. For the first time his dislike of Rip Campbell was not evident. Rip's cold probing stare could find no sign that Hogan might have known something about this. No sign that any guilt was attached to the man. But Hogan was clever. He would be able to hide his feelings. There's no use sending anyone after Young, Hogan decided curtly. We haven't much chance of catching him now. I'll put men guarding the powder in case anyone else has a try at it. Are you hurt? Campbell? Shook up is all. Tell them to put Grayson in bed. I want the medicine chest and hot water, plenty of it. Sims, the bookkeeper, will take care of that. I'll need a few minutes to get things straightened out here and more guards posted. Hogan's stare was probing. Grayson seems to think you can be trusted. Campbell. I'm counting on you to be where I can use you. This was a new Hogan. Maybe, Rip thought as he hurried toward the office, Grayson had more reason to speak well of Hogan than a man would believe. And yet, Cole Young had been thick with Hogan, had Trip in that fight with Hogan. How could you be sure of Hogan after that? How could you have much idea what was on Hogan's mind now that Bull Grayson was down and helpless? Hogan might have been waiting for this to happen. Here at the Birch Mine you could believe anything of any man. The bookkeeper was right. The place seemed to be cursed, the devil to have a hand in the rich high-grade yellow gold which was being won by blood and death. Katie Grayson, Rip saw, was out in the open before the stone office. She looked slimmer, younger than ever as she ran to meet the men carrying her father. She did not try to hide an agony of fear and apprehension when she saw who they were carrying. Her voice shook. Is he dead? Not yet, said Rip, and could have bitten his tongue at the scant hope he gave her. Tears were in her gray eyes. Her hands clenched, her face was pale as she said, bring him to the side door. It's closer to his room. She ran ahead to the door. Rip kept with her, speaking of hot water and the medicine chest. I'll see to it, she said. Sims ran to the bunkhouse. I don't think he'll be much help. Now she was cooler than Rip would have thought possible. No tears, no wringing of hands, no wailing and crying. She led the way to Grayson's bedroom, and then hurried off for hot water and the medicine kit. Her heart must have been breaking, for Bull Grayson was a gruesome sight. Blood smeared the mine owner's face and clotted in his hair. A gash in his arm had soaked blood into a bandana which had been hurriedly tied about the spot. In the small, quiet, low-ceilinged bedroom where the miner's heavy boots shuffled uneasily, Grayson looked like a dead man, or a man close to death. Get the medicine chest, wherever it is, Rip directed as he opened Grayson's shirt to look for a bullet hole. The man had not been shot, but the ribs on one side of his chest looked sunken and weird. Rip probed the spot gently with his fingertips, and felt broken bone where a rock had crashed into Grayson's ribs. Dan Hogan came into the room with his quick cat-like tread. Get back from the bed, get outside the room, men. Hogan ordered. You, Campbell, stay in here. Calhoun, too, I guess. I may need you. Where's the medicine chest and hot water? How is his heart? Hogan went into action as he talked. He must have learned some medicine. His hands had a sure, deft touch that Rip had to admire. Heart seems all right, Hogan decided. He shook his head as he felt the broken ribs. Get his boots off, he said to Rip. Watch that right leg. Something is wrong there. Rip had not noticed, he saw it now as Hogan examined the leg below the knee. Broken, Hogan said and turned back to the great gash at the scalp line which was smearing Grayson's face with blood. Two men brought in a small stout wooden chest. Another passed in a kettle of hot water and a basin. Katie Grayson hurried in with towels and a sheet. How is he? She asked anxiously. Good, said Hogan, rummaging in the chest. Maybe you'd better wait outside the door. Miss Katie. I'll stay, the girl said. Now her eyes were dry, her pale face calm. Hogan worked on the head wound first, and Grayson stirred, groaned, opened his eyes. For a moment Grayson looked around vacantly. His hand fluttered uncertainly to his face. Father. Katie Grayson said, and now there was a sob in her voice. A faint, grim smile lighted Grayson's blood-smeared countenance. I'm all right, baby, he mumbled. He looked at Hogan. Leo Calhoun, Rip. Did it all go up? No, said Hogan. You got Abe. Young escaped. Grayson closed his eyes. Bascom's work. There'll be more coming. Get the gold out and Katie along with it. Can't have her here if trouble busts loose. Campbell can take her. Need you here, Hogan. Campbell? Said Hogan. Some of the old distrust was in the question. Campbell, Grayson muttered. Want all the gunmen hired he can get. Pat Thompson at Three Forks'll give him help. Get Katie away. I'll not leave you like this, Father, Katie Grayson said unsteadily. Got to get you away, Grayson mumbled. He was gray-faced, weaker with each word. He tried a deep breath and a spasm of pain crossed his face. She'll start as soon as you're fixed up, Hogan promised. He looked over his shoulder at Rip. The men are saddling at the corral, Campbell. The gold's ready to load in the buggy. You're in charge. Miss Grayson will be ready. No. Katie Grayson refused. Rip was leaving the room as Hogan answered coolly. I'm running the birch now, Miss Grayson. You'll do as your father says. Chapter 12. Twilight was deepening fast when Rip reached the corral. Men were roping and saddling horses. 7, 9 men Rip counted. Men he didn't know. Strangers. Junior Stern stepped up. Your horse, too, senor? See, said Rip. I'm bossing this, Grayson and Hogan said. Can you ride and shoot? Junior Stern shrugged. I'm just one horse hand. I know what you are, said Rip. I'm asking you what you can do. Horse herding ain't all you know. I think maybe so, Junior Stern said quietly. Saddle up and come along, Rip told him. I like your looks. We're riding to Three Forks with Bargold and Grayson's girl. I want plenty of guns, and someone I know along. A smile flickered behind the rugged features of Stern young face. So? Maybe you like my Mexican guts, senor? I'll tell you later, said Rip. Get a good horse and guns. Somebody else can watch the corral tonight. The big cream stallion stood in the dusty corral, proudly reserved while other horses milled around. His head was alertly up. He seemed to know work was ahead. Yes, a man like Jim Riley would kill for a horse like this. And would kill to get him back, Rip thought, as he led the stallion out of the corral for saddling. In 10 minutes they were ready. Including Junior Stern, whose saddle, gun boot, rifle and twin 6-guns he had not worn until now, showed hard use and care. 4 small, speedy-looking horses were hitched to a 2-seated buggy. A man on the back seat had a shotgun and a rifle. The driver had a rifle. He was a wizened oldster with a drooping brown mustache, an old hat canted over one eye and no expression on his face when Rip reined in beside the buggy and asked, "Think you can take it fast all the way in the dark?" The driver chewed in silence for a moment. He spat over the wheel and drawled, "I reckon so, if Jake hangs on tight back there. Just keep out of my way and give me room. You've got it from now to Three Forks," Rip chuckled. "Drive over to the office and load up." It was as simple as that. The men accepted his authority silently. But whether they liked the gaunt young newcomer over them or not was hard to tell. Leo Calhoun was giving directions at the office. Men staggered out with 2 small iron-bound chests. Only gold could have made those chests so heavy. They were put by the feet of the man in the back of the buggy and roped there. Rip dismounted. Leo Calhoun joined him. "Wish I was going along," he said. "Come along. I'll need you. Hogan wants me here. Grayson's gal will be out in a few minutes." "So she decided to go?" "Hardest thing she's ever faced, I reckon," said Calhoun. "She's got a feeling that Grayson won't leave the birch alive. But he wants her to go and she's not going to worry him by being contrary." "Good girl," Rip said, and looked at the darkening sky. "I'd rather do a heap of things than start to Three Forks with that girl. And that gold," added Leo Calhoun slowly. "Campbell, there's men here in camp who'd kill their own mother for a chance at that much gold. Not to speak of outlaws outside. How about these men I'm taking?" Rip asked under his breath. "I wish I knew," Calhoun admitted. "Better watch sharp. If you ask me, hell has finally busted loose around here. What's due to follow ain't gonna be nice." Katie walked to the buggy through the deep purple twilight. She was solemn and quiet. Rip could not help contrasting her with the girl who had left Three Forks only the day before. Sims, the bookkeeper, pushed through the crowd of miners which had gathered for the departure. "I'm going," Sims cried shrilly. "Not another night in this cursed place." One of the guards rode forward and blocked him from the buggy. "You've got to take me," Sims begged frantically. "Can't we take him, Mr. Campbell?" Katie Grayson asked. "Ride the back seat, Sims," Rip decided. "First trouble you make, I'll have you pitched out on the road." The buggy rolled off a moment later. The heavy gate opened for them, the armed riders poured through, then the buggy followed to the road, and the long whiplash sent the four-horse team running hard eastward into the somber cloak of night. Rip glanced back at the mine as he topped the crest of the first grade. Lights were beginning to wink back there. The faint beat of the stamp mill reached through the drumming hoofs like the restless strokes of a heart that would not stop, like Bull Grayson's heart that stubbornly defied all odds. 4 men rode behind the buggy, 4 in front, including Rip. The effortless run of Riley's horse would make any man glow with pride. "Caramba, what a horse, amigo!" Junior Stern called over through the last purple light. "But that buggy, she's coming plenty fast, no?" The droop-mustached old driver was driving the fast 4-horse team with reckless skill. The racing buggy bounced, lurched, swayed along the rough and winding road and careened around the sharp turns. Night blotted out the road, and the bouncing, swaying buggy came on faster than ever. Katie Grayson would never forget this ride. Mile after mile the road down through the bleak and lonely hills. The stars were cold and bright and the black shadows wrapped the way with protection. Each mile put them nearer Three Forks and safety for Grayson's gold and Grayson's daughter. Riding ahead with Stern and 2 more men, Rip felt his spirits begin to lift with relief. The devil himself could not have struck with less warning. It might have been the devil himself waiting on that stretch of road where low stunted trees grew close and the road shadows between them were blacker. Junior Stern and another rider were just ahead of Rip, and barely visible in the starlight. The first warning was a wild yell from Stern. Both of the men and the horses they were riding plunged helplessly down on the road. Rip's horse snorted, tried to leap the tangle of fallen horses and men and went down in a plunging fall himself. Rip kicked his feet out of the box stirrups as he was hurled from the silver-mounted saddle. A kicking hoof knocked him rolling to the side of the road. A horse screamed in fright, and the bawling curses of the old buggy driver were audible as the hard-running harness horses bolted into the tangle that blocked the road. More horses went down. The buggy overturned as guns blazed from the side of the road. "Shoot the men riding behind!" a voice bawled. Rip came up by the side of the road with his left arm numb and useless where the floundering horse kicked him. His rifle had gone down in the saddle boot and the horse wasn't visible. Snatching out his handgun, Rip turned past the floundering horses toward the overturned buggy. Something in the blackness tripped him. He came up from the second fall, knowing that a rope had been stretched taut between the roadside trees at the right height to bring down running horses. Ambush gunmen beside the road were pouring shots. The muzzle flashes were like vicious fireflies. Back on the road other guns were answering, but the flashes were retreating. Rip swore helplessly. All Grayson's gold could not make his hired gunmen stand in the murderous crossfire of a surprise ambush. A shotgun bellowed just ahead. In the trees a man yelled with pain. "Come on, you dirty killers, and get more of it!" The buggy driver challenged in shrill fury. Rip blundered into the front wheels of the overturned buggy. "Miss Grayson!" he called. The driver answered from the other side of the buggy. "She got out safe. Where are you, lady?" A riderless horse almost knocked Rip down as it bolted back along the road. The thin, crying fright of Sims, the bookkeeper, pierced through the gunshots. Snorting, floundering harness horses were pulling in all directions and dragging the buggy along the road. "Miss Grayson!" Rip shouted again. "Here!" her voice answered. She was up at the head of the plunging team. "One of these horses is down." I think his leg is broken." "Keep away from them," Rip yelled, sick at heart as he ran forward. Bull Grayson himself could not have avoided this trap. But Grayson wouldn't believe that. The numbed shoulder became usable again as Rip dodged around the maddened horses and bumped into a slender figure. His quick catch saved her from falling. "This way," Rip said huskily. Flashing guns along the roadside showed that they were vastly outnumbered. But bullets weren't striking around the overturned buggy. Rip guessed Katie Grayson was the reason. The bandits were trying not to hit her. "Put down them guns and you won't be hurt," a strident voice yelled from the tree. Rip looked desperately about as he reached Katie Grayson and ran her forward in the road. He saw a lighter shadow and made for it, thanking God when he saw he was right. The big cream-colored horse stood uneasily with the reins dragging, so well trained he had not bolted after regaining his feet. Speaking soothingly, Rip caught the reins, led the horse a step to make sure it was not crippled. "Hold on to the stirrup," Rip told the girl. He forked the saddle, reached down and swung Katie Grayson up before him, and yanked the big stallion to the left off the road as other riders poured out of the trees ahead of them and blocked the road. A wild yell announced their discovery. "There's one of them on a white horse. My Star Blaze horse, by damn!" Rip ducked trying to shield the girl, as the big horse burst in among the trees. Behind them the pursuit came thundering, and the bellow of Jim Riley warned, "Don't shoot my horse. I want him sound." 3 branches slashed Rip's face. A low-hanging limb scraped the top of his head and almost knocked him from the saddle. Behind them guns were crashing, but they were aiming high in the dark, trying not to hit the horse. Rip's rifle was still in the hand-tooled saddle boot, but the rolling horses had broken the gun stock. No use firing a 6-gun back at them. Muzzle flashes would only give the outlaws better aim. Suddenly Rip stifled an oath as the stallion swerved sharply to dodge a tree and the saddle slipped. Helplessly Rip realized that the rolling fall on the road had loosened the saddle. Any second now it might turn and throw them under the driving hoofs. And the pursuit was following so close there wasn't a chance to dismount and tighten the cinches. The horse swerved hard again. The saddle slipped badly this time. Rip reined hard to a stop. "Saddle's coming off." He ripped out. "Let's try to give them the slip in the dark." Katie Grayson dropped lightly to the ground. Rip hurled himself after her, and so quickly did they dismount and run that for an instant Rip had hopes they might be swallowed in the night's blackness. But the pursuit roared up with heartbreaking speed. Men yelled when the empty saddle was discovered. "There he goes!" one called. A gun crashed, riders ripped among the trees after them, and Rip knew this was the end. "There's a lady here," he shouted. "Hold your guns." Panting and bitterly helpless, Rip spoke bleakly to Katie Grayson. "It's the best I could do. I'm sorry." "We tried anyway," the girl said unsteadily. Then riders were all about them. Men swung down with drawn guns and they were prisoners. "Hell, it's the gal. He must have got away with her." "Who is he?" "He was riding Riley's horse," a rasping voice said. "Maybe he's the feller he wants." "Hey! Take a look at this man." A match was struck. Other matches flared out. Faces leapt into view, unshaven, hard faces, some leering, some scowling. "Ain't she a pretty little trick? Lee will do a buck and wing over this. He swore he'd rather have her than all the gold that come out of the damn mine. Lee ain't so dumb. I kind of feel that way myself after getting a good look at her. Ain't seen nothing so sweet and pretty in a year." Katie Grayson groped for Rip's hand. She trembled as she clutched his fingers for comfort. "Keep steady," Rip comforted her. But in his heart he could find no comfort for this girl, small hope that she would escape. There was a venom and hate between the outlaw, Lee Bascom, and Bull Grayson, which was hard to understand or explain. A man shouldered to them, struck several matches together, and held the flame close to their faces. Tall, lean and saturnine, with 2 6-guns tied low, a knife sheathed on his hip, wearing a gaudy Mexican jacket with silver concha buttons, there was nothing reassuring about the man who peered at them. A high-peaked Mexican sombrero hung back on his shoulders, held by braided leather thongs, a bandage was tied around his forehead, and a thin cold smile twisted his mouth as he surveyed Rip. "It's the one," he said. "By hell, he's the one who shot a rock splinter in my face yesterday and stole my horse. This is sure a lucky night. How about the gal?" Riley dropped the match ends as his grin broadened. "She's Lee's. Tie this horse thief and walk him back. The gal rode right pretty on my saddle. Get in here, I'll cuddle her back on the same saddle myself." Talk would be futile. Rip kept his teeth locked tight while his arms were roped to his sides and a rider took the end of the rope and drove him on foot back toward the road. And Katie Grayson, too, was silent as Jim Riley swung her up on the big horse and rode ahead. Chapter 13. Hope had left Rip Campbell. The 4 guards riding behind the buggy had bolted back toward the Birch mine. And Rip had heard nor seen nothing of Junior Stern after the first warning yell as Stern fell. Now all shooting back in the road had stopped. They were vastly outnumbered. The Birch and any help that might be sent were long miles back into the west. A fire of dry branches crackled and blazed in the road by the overturned buggy when Rip walked out of the trees. 2 dead horses lay in the road. Near one horse lay the dead guard who had ridden beside Junior Stern. The other guard was there, a sullen prisoner. The gray-haired driver of the buggy was holding a wounded arm. Sims was cowering in terrified silence. The man who had been guarding the gold in the back seat was not in sight. The outlaws had dragged the 2 iron-bounded gold chests to the fire. As Rip approached, a short, fleshless man with a clean-shaven face held a 6-gun close to the lock of one of the chests and shattered it with shots. He worked a moment, then threw the lid back. Whistles and exclamations greeted the gleam of small yellow gold bars in the firelight. "We can buy out South America and live off the white fat down there from now to then." A man whooped. The outlaw who had opened the chest faced them with the smoking gun slack in his band. For a moment a racking terrible cough shook his emaciated body. Then his voice cracked at them like a lash. "Forget this gold until there's time enough to spend it. We got plenty more to do. Nothing that'll get us anything like this, Lee." Rip stared in fascination at Lee Bascom, whom he was finally facing. The bandit leader seemed to shrink and crouch and coil as he faced the speaker. "You don't like the way I'm running things, Johnson?" The man he called Johnson would have made 2 of Bascom. He wore twin guns also. But his denial was hasty and fervent. "Everything suits me, Lee. I was just putting in my word. I don't need your talk to run this bunch." Lee Bascom turned to Rip. Blazing branches fell in on the fire and the flames leapt up. The light flickered and danced over a face that was like dry leather stretched taut over a bony skull in which sunken eyes blazed malevolently. The stage driver had said that 9 years in the Yuma pen had sweated Lee Bascom down to a sack of bones. It had. Bascom was like a death's head on a body that had wasted away to bone, a few sinews, and skin. Looking like a living skeleton. Lee Bascom stood there with a flame burning inside him, a fire glowing back of his eyes that was like nothing human. He was vicious, venomous, malevolent. He looked as if the fire of life inside him fed on hate and cold inhuman fury that included all men. At Rip's left Riley held the arm of Katie Grayson. In the firelight Riley's face was bold, reckless and cruel, but it lacked the bitter hate that seemed to ooze from Lee Bascom. Rip wondered again why a hard-bitten border jumper in his own right, like Jim Riley, should be taking orders from any outlaw leader. Even Lee Bascom. Bascom's eyes were burning at Rip. "So you're the one who's under my feet every move I make." "What moves," asked Rip, "are you making?" Lee Bascom had that coiling look again, as if he were posing to strike without warning. "The stage yesterday," he said. "And that little play at the mine just before dark. You was in both of them up to your damn neck. Cole Young must have gotten away clean and made contact with the outlaws." Rip looked around, but among the 12.5 men crowding close to the fire, he failed to see Young. It was plain however that this outlaw bunch had been close to the Birch before dark. They had been waiting, Rip guessed with a flash of insight, for the great store of explosives to wreck and stun the mine camp before they poured down like buzzards to pick the bones that were left. Bascom had planned it all when he sent orders to Cole Young last night. "Your business is your own," Rip said shortly. "I've been tackling things as they come up." Bascom's death's head smile was ghastly. "You tackled one too many, mister. We had a spyglass on the mine while you was fixing to leave. You didn't have a chance." "Wish I'd known," said Rip. "Maybe we'd have had a chance." Bascom looked around at the prisoners. "These men say Grayson's flat on his back and helpless. Maybe dead by now. He'll take a heap of killing," declared Rip, and added against his better judgment. "Maybe you've found that out." Bascom jumped at him, striking with the gun barrel. The fury flaring on that fleshless face was murderous. Rip dodged and the blow struck his shoulder instead of his head. "Don't laugh at me," Lee was screaming, "or I'll give you some of what I've been saving for Grayson for 10 years. You could almost see froth on the screaming lips, then icy reason blotted out the insane fury. Bascom shuddered and stepped back, shaken by a spasm of coughing. His voice came forced and husky. "Grayson'll never die until I settle with him. He'll live to suffer and think and eat his heart out. He'll die 1,000 times every time I send word to him about what's happening to his daughter down below the border. With his mind gone and his daughter gone, he'll think of Lee Bascom day and night until he's dead." Silence had fallen over the ring of outlaw gunmen. It was as if something gruesome and terrible beyond their own hard-bitten sins had silenced them. Rip slid a look at Katie Grayson, so pale, young and helpless now. The firelight danced against tears she was holding back as she bit hard on her lower lip. "What have you got against Grayson?" Rip asked Bascombe carefully. Bascombe had his harsh dry voice under control now. "He framed me into the Yuma pen because his sister acted like a fool when I threw her over," he said. "Walked out in a blizzard and froze herself to death. Grayson and that damned Hogan, who was in love with the gal himself, twisted the evidence and had me put in hell for 9 long years to pay for it. Told me privately they was aiming to make me pay one way or another." Bascombe spat. "I warned them that I'd settle 10 for 1. God, the years I spent waiting to get out at them. And now I've got Grayson like I want him. He'll wish he died like that fool sister of his when he hears what's going to happen to his daughter." He lapsed into silence, grim satisfaction on his long face. Then he said, "Campbell, here's a man you know. An old compadre, he says. Where's that fellow?" "Compadre," said Rip, glancing at the man who stepped forward. "How'd you get friendly so quick with these wolves?" The compadre was worn and dusty from hard travel. But he was still slender, aristocratic, dandified. He was still Juan Diego de Garcia, whose family were lords of that wild empire west of Chihuahua City and the frowning peaks of the Continental Divide. "Gringo," Juan Garcia said stiffly. "I followed." "I figured you would," nodded Rip. "But I did plan on having both hands free when we met up." Rip's lip curled. "You can go back and tell old Tio and Guadalupe and the other Garcia what a caballero they sent out to drag down a lady as good as your own sister." Juan Garcia was staring at Katie Grayson. "With her I have nothing to do," he mumbled in Spanish. Lee Bascombe grinned. "Some of the boys caught him trailing that Three Forks stage. They knew him from Mexico and brought him to me. When I heard what he was after on this side of the border, I made a deal promising you to him after we cleaned out the mine. He talked so damned bloodthirsty that we're all primed to watch his showdown with you." Then Bascombe wheeled on the men as if regretting so much talk. "Get that buggy ready now. The gold will stay like it is until we're ready to divvy up and scatter. Jump fast, boys, while things is running our way." Chapter 14. The prisoners were put on horses and their feet roped under their horses' bellies. Katie Grayson rode once more in the buggy with the gold. The outlaws backtracked a mile or more, then turned southwest across the harsh open country. The gold bars weighing so heavily in the buggy acted like fiery trade whiskey on the outlaws. They were jubilant, frolicsome, joking and laughing. Rip gathered that they had raided other gold shipments from the mine, but never had such a one as this fallen into their hands. Even Lee Bascombe seemed to share in the jubilation. But it was not gold that affected Bascombe. Hate was running like drunken fire through the veins of that emaciated, malevolent gunman. No wonder Grayson had known no peace, had been fearful for his daughter's safety, and savagely stubborn in keeping his mind open. The blood trail that young Juan Garcia had taken after Rip Campbell was the childish exasperation of a harmless young man compared to the venomous purpose of Lee Bascombe. Not that young Garcia was less dangerous now. Moodily Rip reflected that he was about washed up. The Garcia would have blood for their blood, and passed the story of Garcia justice down to their children's children. But it was Katie Grayson and Bull Grayson of whom Rip thought with bitter regret. He'd failed Grayson when the man needed him most. Small return to give for the saving of your life. No imagination was needed about Katie Grayson. Far down in Mexico she wouldn't have a chance. Rip had seen tawdry, hard-faced girls in the cantinas and dance halls south of the border who once might have been Katie Graysons. They never came back home. Rip judged it was well past midnight when they traversed a narrow little valley between frowning mountain slopes. The valley narrowed to a long bottleneck, and then widened again. Under the star-studded sky in the south, Rip could make out vast reaches of descending lower country. They splashed through a tiny mountain brook, and just beyond found corrals filled with horses, and low, badly weathered adobe buildings. Waiting men greeted them. Questions were called and answered as riders dismounted. This, Rip gathered, was one of the outlaw hideouts. His horse had stopped beside the one ridden by the grizzled old buggy driver. "I had a hunch we was heading to here," the old man grumbled. "It's the old diamond spread that used to be owned by a feller named McCarty. Rustlers from across the border cleaned him out and he left. Ain't more than 6-7 miles to the border. Dad blamed this arm. Hit's still oozing blood. I blew the head off of the feller who done it, though. Things looks bad for us, don't they?" "Kind of," Rip agreed. "Grayson's damn gold pack's a curse if I ever seen one," the driver said bitterly. "It seems to," Rip agreed. Guns covered them as they were taken off the horses. Lanterns were being lit, men were heading to the corrals for fresh horses as Rip and the other prisoners were hustled inside the old ranch house. Half an eye could see that the place had long been abandoned. Only crude repairs had been made. Ain't this luck now? Rip looked around into the cold-lipped grin of Cole Young, who was using a stick for a cane and limping badly when he moved. The company don't improve, Rip remarked. I'm surprised you didn't crawl down in a snake hole so as to feel at home. Young's grin was half a snarl as he struck Rip in the face. Juan Garcia had brought Katie Grayson in, and he jumped forward as Rip's head snapped back from the blow. This man is mine. The young Mexican protested. Who in hell are you? Young demanded. Lee Bascom intervened. Get away, Young. I promised Campbell to that young feller. I've got a score with Campbell, Young blurted angrily. You heard me, snapped Bascom. I know what I'm doing. You want to argue about it? Cole Young shrugged and turned away, glowering. Juan Garcia spoke coldly to Rip. That is not the Garcia way. Rip tasted blood on his lip as he smiled thinly and replied in Spanish. The Garcia like a knife or gun better, verdad? We show no mercy to our enemies, señor. There was so much stiff-necked, youthful pride in the answer that Rip laughed. Juan Garcia was a handsome young don, following his code as to what was right. Another time, another place, he might be likable. In the next room coffee and food were being hurriedly prepared. As fresh horses were saddled and made ready to ride, more men crowded into the room. Black coffee, plates of beans, bacon and cold Mexican tortillas were hurriedly put away. The prisoners were offered nothing, but Rip saw Juan Garcia bring coffee and a plate of food to Katie Grayson, and urge her in broken English to eat. Finally she drank a little coffee and ate a few bites of food. Chalk that good deed up for the Garcia gallantry at any rate. Lee Bascom, Jim Riley and half a dozen other men were arguing in low voices at the end of the room. Finally Riley left them and began to eat. When most of the plates were empty and cigarettes were lighted, Lee Bascom lifted his voice. Here's what we're doing. The gold's going over the border tonight, where it'll be safe. The girl goes, too. And that feller Campbell goes with the young man I promised him too. There's a hideout a couple days south where they'll wait for us. We'll know the gold is safe there when we want it. An uncertain silence was broken by a sullen question. Is he gonna take our gold across the border? Lee Bascom's fleshless face was almost ghastly as he grinned. You're the right feller to ask. Your two brothers, Jim and Lon, are going to take a couple more men to make sure the gold don't sprout wings when it gets out of our sight. He turned to the other man. You're going to come along with us so we'll all be damned sure your brothers don't get tired of waiting and move on with our gold. If it ain't there when we come looking for it, there'll be a brother filled full of lead fast and quick. And it'll be you. That suit everybody? Rip judged most of the men were against it. One bearded, broad-shouldered man spoke for the others. What do we get by wiping the mine out? Lee? It'll have more gold if it keeps on running. I'm for spending this gold now. Bascom had the crouching, coiling look again as his voice lashed with contempt. The gold's got you fools blinded. This whole end of the country will be up in arms over the girl. Ain't a one of you'll dare stay around. And she goes with me. I'll kill the first man who don't like it. Nobody arguing about that. Lee. Use your heads then. With Grayson's mind blown up and Grayson's pockets empty, nobody's going to give a damn what Grayson thinks. His hands will be tied. The quickest way to have all this blow over, is to clip Grayson's wings while we got the chance. They won't be looking for us at the mine today. Not in broad daylight. They'll figure we skipped over the border. What's Jim think about it? A doubtful voice asked. Jim Riley took a cigarette from his mouth and nodded. I'm stringing along with Lee. The sooner we start the better. Riley's decision carried the doubtful ones. Hurried preparations started for departure. In the confusion, Katie Grayson had a chance to move close. Can't we do anything? She whispered through stiff lips. Both bound and helpless, Rip shrugged. None of them ever care enough about us to cross Bascom, ma'am. The young man who brought me food was kind. Young Garcia, Rip said quietly, followed me out of Mexico to put a knife or a bullet in me. But he was so kind to me, Rip's eyes narrowed at a sudden thought. Be nice back at him, ma'am. He's the only chance you've got. When you get down in his own country, he might weaken and help you if he's handled right. Flushing, Katie Grayson nodded. A few minutes later Rip noted with satisfaction that she was again talking to Juan Garcia. And it seemed to Rip that young Garcia's eyes were hungry, troubled as they rested on the girl. Even that slight hope for her cheered Rip. The gold was stowed in leather pack sacks lashed on 2 pack mules. There were 7 who were making the long ride into Mexico. The 2 brothers, Joe and Len, were big men, bearded and gruff. And there was an outlaw named Jake, and another called Tonka, a lank, leathery saturnine, slow-moving man. But a dangerous hombre, Rip guessed. Juan Garcia, Katie Grayson, Rip and two more pack mules made up the party. Behind them they left the other prisoners, and the main body of the outlaws who were getting ready to ride to the Birch. Rip's final salute was from Jim Riley. "If that man don't kill you, Campbell, I sure will when we meet up," Rip chuckled grimly. "If he don't, Riley, I'd like a chance to get that horse back." Riley laughed ironically as he turned away. "I like your nerve, Campbell. But you said the surest thing to make me kill you on sight." Once more the night swallowed them. The trail they rode wound down through descending broken country into the wilderness south of the border. South into Old Mexico, toward those vast lands where the Garcia warlords, and young Juan, a don in his own right, would one day fill the shoes of old Dio Garcia. Rip didn't exactly see how it happened, but after a time he noticed Juan Garcia riding off in beside Katie Grayson. Their low-toned talk was not audible. Rip grinned coldly to himself. Katie Grayson was working fast. Even a Garcia don had his weak spots. 2 hours of that and dawn was near. They'd ride through the day, Rip was curtly told by Len, the big outlaw who rode beside him. "The lady ain't strong enough," Rip objected. "Who gives a damn? We'll tie her on." Juan Garcia presently reined back beside Rip. Len Purdy growled, "'Bout time you got away from that girl. She's Bascombs. This hombre Campbell is all I want," Garcia said stiffly. "Going to cut his throat like you swore you would? I think now is good time." Len chuckled. "Can't wait, huh? Well, go ahead. He's yours. I think I do it here and catch up later." "Hell, you're cold-blooded," said Len. "I don't want to see it. Bring his horse when you're through." Rip said coldly, "I wouldn't let a dog get butchered like this." "If he was gold," Len retorted, "it might matter. Yo ain't none of my business anyway. Argue with the man there." Purdy spurred ahead as Juan Garcia yanked Rip's horse to a stop. It was still dark. Rip reached carefully inside his shirt, under his belt. His wrists, tied with rawhide, allowed him to awkwardly handle the knife he brought out. It was the knife of the dead Jose Garcia, which the outlaws hadn't found. "I got something to say to you," Rip said, heeling his horse so that it danced aside in the trail. Turning the knife, Rip sawed the blade awkwardly up inside his wrists against the rawhide thongs. "What you say?" One thong parted, another, and a third. Rip's hands were free and only his ankles were tied under the horse. He gripped the knife, gathered the reins in the other hand, and tensed to spur closer and strike hard. Garcia steel slashing for an Garcia life. Fate, Rip thought, took some weird turns. Chapter 15. Then he held back in amazement as words tumbled out of Juan Garcia. "They don't hear now. By the Holy Mother, Senor Campbell, you must help me." "What's that?" Rip jerked out in amazement. Garcia shifted into excited Spanish. "The Señorita. Ah, so quickly am I loving her. She must go to her father. He must be helped." A long silent breath escaped Rip. So Katie Grayson had put it over. "I help you, and then get your knife in my back?" he said skeptically. "Por Dios, no. How could I kill the man who helped the girl I love? Amigo, the past is dead. How this happened I do not know. I am mad with love. She is an angel. A little dove, so helpless, so bonita, so. "Don't gag on all that sweet talk," Rip said dryly as he slipped the knife back under his belt. "After she's safe we can listen to it. Got an extra gun?" "Only my rifle," Garcia confessed glumly. "And there are four." "Four ain't so many. 2 of them are riding up ahead with the pack mules. Give me your 6-gun. Use the knife you were saving for me, and then your rifle." "Amigo," said Juan Garcia in a voice that shook, "the Señorita and I will never forget your friendship." "Every time you call me amigo," said Rip, "I get boogery and don't believe it. We'll get drunk together if we come out of this. Maybe then it'll sound all right." He tensed. "What's that?" Rip wheeled his horse to the back trail and cocked the 6-gun as a low voice cautiously whispered. "Senor Campbell? Who is it?" "Junior Stern." "Hell, I must be drunk already," Rip exclaimed. "Where'd you come from?" Junior Stern appeared magically under the nose of Rip's horse. Afoot, he had approached with panther-like stealth. "2 of us have followed," Junior Stern said cautiously. "Who is this man?" "A friend. We're fixing to help Miss Grayson escape." "I think I hear so when I listen to you," Stern said. "How many must we kill?" "4, and damn good men." "You wait." Junior Stern vanished again. Even Rip could not hear him leave. Minutes later 2 horses came along the trail. Junior Stern rode one, the guard who had vanished with him at the fight was on the other. "Follow us," Rip directed after describing what was ahead. "Watch out for Miss Grayson. She'll be right in front of the first trouble. He also still found all this hard to believe as he rode on behind Juan Garcia. "You finished him off mighty quiet," Len's voice called as they rode up. "Oh, see," said Juan Garcia. "Ride back here with Jake. I'm going up front." "1 minute, senor," said Garcia, reining over beside Jake. Rip spurred hard, was up beside Len before the man realized the second horse still carried a rider. "What the hell?" Len blurted as Rip chopped hard with the gun barrel, trying to knock him out. Len's head jerked, the weapon struck his shoulder, and he was drawing his own gun in the same instant. A strangled cry ended in a gasp behind Rip, and he dragged his gun barrel down over Purdy's shoulder and triggered. At that it was almost too late. Len's shot followed an instant later as the man was blasted back. But he was already a dying man shooting wildly. As Len plunged into the darkness, Rip spurred forward. "Ride back," he called as he passed Katie Grayson. Ahead Jim shouted. "Len, are you alright?" When no answer came, red flame spit at Rip. A second gun joined in as Rip rushed at them with his own gun blasting. The pack animals were snorting and rearing away. An unearthly, screeching yell lifted behind from Junior Stern. A bullet grazed Rip's arm. He fired his last shot and snatched the knife from his belt just as he reached the gunman who had shot him. The man was a dark weaving blot on a rearing horse. Rip leaned over and stabbed hard as he rode by, and set himself for the shot he expected. The knife went into the hilt and was torn from Rip's hand. And there was no shot. Rip heard the other outlaw galloping off through the low brush off the trail. With a whoop, Junior Stern followed. And when Rip wheeled back to meet the man he had stabbed, he found an empty saddle. Guns began to fire from where Junior Stern had ridden. Then a distant yell of triumph told that Junior had caught his man. It was over that quickly. The pack mules had run off the trail. Rip and the guard who had come with Junior Stern went after them. Junior galloped up to help. 3 dead, 1 Wimala, Stern called. Juan Garcia was comforting Katie Grayson when they were all together again on the trail. The lanky Tonka, who had been shot through the mouth, had just died. "Miss Grayson, we'll get you to Three Forks first," said Rip. "Not now. I've got to know how my father is." "I won't argue," Rip yielded. "And I guess the mine has got word out for help long ago. The best we can do is kill these horses getting back there and hope we're in time." Bascom wasn't figuring on doing anything until long after daylight. Maybe late in the day. "We'll have to hide the gold as soon as it gets daylight. If Bascom wipes out the birch, there ain't any use carrying the gold back to him." "I think so, too," agreed Junior Stern. 2 hours later, in the first gray light of dawn, north of the border and west of the old Diamond Ranch, they stopped to cache the gold in a little side canyon. At the foot of a little rock slide they laid the heavy leather sacks, and covered them with rocks until the spot looked natural. Miles farther on, they unsaddled the pack mules, turned them loose and continued the hard grim ride into the north. Hour by hour Katie Grayson visibly drooped with increasing weariness. But when Rip halted to give her rest, she insisted on going on toward the birch. Juan Garcia rode beside Katie. His attention was unflagging. Concern, devotion were in his every look and speech. Rip, watching, felt sorry for the handsome young Mexican. Katie Grayson couldn't be blamed for encouraging him, but the truth was going to be a bitter pill. Junior Stern was guiding them. He had been through this country and knew it well. And Rip tried not to think of what would happen this time if they again met the Bascom bunch. The dead outlaw had furnished them with plenty of cartridges and guns. But 4 men couldn't hold off the Bascom bunch. The mid-morning sun was high and bright when Rip recognized the low harsh hills ahead. "Not far now," he said to Junior Stern. "Not far, senor." Half an hour later, from a high ridge they were crossing, Rip saw a little plume of dark smoke some miles ahead. Under that smoke would be the birch mill and Rest and Help. "The mine ain't blown up yet, anyway. I guess we're all right now," Rip cheered them. That wasn't exactly so. The closer they got to the mine, the nearer they were to the Bascom gunmen. They were riding up a deep brushy draw when the keen eyes of Junior Stern first discovered trouble. Stern whipped up his rifle and fired to the left, at the top of the high slope. Chapter 16. Rip had his rifle up even before he saw what Stern was shooting at. His sights swung over a magnificent cream-colored horse that was being savagely reined around at the top of the slope. Riley must have ridden out into view there without knowing anyone was down in the draw. Junior Stern had missed his hurried shot. Rip's finger was squeezing the trigger, and suddenly he couldn't put a bullet in that horse. In another moment Riley was out of sight. They heard him fire 3 quick shots. His yell drifted back. "Ride like hell!" Rip had already cried. Junior Stern called a wry reproof to Rip as their tired horses burst into full gallop. "I think you much better shoot that horse then, amigo. Is better he die than you." Rip nodded. A minute later Junior Stern looked back and grimly jerked a thumb. Behind them Riley and 3 other riders were racing down into the draw. As Rip looked, 2 more men flashed over the crest and followed. And then another. Then a turn and the draw cut off sight of the pursuit for the moment. But you could be sure Bascombe hadn't let his men scatter much. They'd all be coming on fresher horses that had rested some. The broken country gave cover of a sort, but it made the going harder for tiring horses. Twice guns opened up behind them for brief moments when they were in sight. Then the long serpentine draw narrowed sharply, and they drove their horses up the steep side. Behind them guns burst out again. Over his shoulder Rip saw a dozen riders trying to keep up with Riley's great horse. And more were coming. "Stern," Rip shouted. "Try to get Miss Grace into the mine. The rest of you back me up." Rip swung from the saddle as he topped the draw slope and opened fire. Juan Garcia and the mine guard were throwing shots beside him an instant later. It caught the Bascombe men by surprise. 2 of them dropped and a horse went down before the outlaws swerved up the side of the draw. "Now they'll be more careful." Rip growled as he hit the saddle again and spurred on. Stern and Katie Grayson were already out of sight. Rip was satisfied. Now the outlaws would have to pass the 3 of them before they could overtake the girl. It had turned into a running fight now through the harsh broken foothills. The gunfire came in crackling bursts as the pursuit sighted them, lost them, and sighted them again and again. The lathered horses were blowing hard and weakening fast when Rip saw the mine smokestack not more than a mile away. Katie Grayson would have covered half that mile already. "Ride for it," Rip yelled as guns opened up on them again. Now he saw that they were south of the mine, south of the road, in the broken little hills through which the creek from the mine camp ran. A short run and they'd reach the creek, and as Rip thought that, a bullet knocked his horse over at full gallop. Rip kicked himself from the saddle as the horse fell, and the rifle was knocked from his hand as he struck the ground hard at one side and rolled helplessly. The horse came to a kicking stop in a cloud of dust. Rip scrambled back on hands and knees for his rifle. A knife-like pain told of the bad sprain there in his hand. At that moment Juan Garcia hit the ground beside him. "On my horse," he cried in English. "Ride on, you fool," Rip shouted. "Your horse won't carry 2 of us." He lurched over behind his dying horse, knelt and opened fire on the crescent line of outlaws galloping at them. And Juan Garcia stood calmly in his tracks and started to shoot also. "By hell, you're a man!" Rip jerked out in admiration. "I am a friend, Senor Campbell, because you have helped me," Juan Garcia retorted. The guard galloped back and joined them. "I might as well lose my hair, too," he called. Now the outlaws were close, 12 of them, a wave of hard angry killers fired by the knowledge that their gold must be gone. And well out ahead of all of them rode Riley, lean, grim, dangerous. Rip got his rifle sights on Riley and squeezed the trigger. He missed. It would be far easier to knock the cream stallion over. But Rip locked his teeth and sighted on Riley again. Bullets were whistling about them. Behind, Juan Garcia's horse staggered away and fell heavily as Rip shot again. And Riley flung himself up and back in the saddle and clutched for support. Juan Garcia's rifle cracked sharply. Riley's horse had stopped. Riley pitched out of the saddle and the stallion stood there with the reins dragging as the other outlaws began to scatter to circle the 3 men on foot. "I think," said Juan Garcia in Spanish, "it is not long now. Look. More of them." The young Mexican had swung his gun toward a wooded slope not 150 yards away on the right. On that slope, bursting into the open, came a second wave of riders, spurring toward them. 2 dozen armed men, still more were pouring down the slope. "Don't shoot, Juan," Rip yelled. "That's Junior Stern riding in front. And that's Hogan from the mine. They're all from the mine." Until then Rip had not seen Lee Bascombe. Now he made out the venomous little outlaw leader on a big black horse that pulled up sharply as Bascombe shouted orders to his men. But a rolling storm of gunfire from the mine riders and the thunder of their charge drowned out all sounds. The outlaw charge had already broken. 1 man turned back. Another followed him. 6 other men who were galloping over to Lee Bascombe lost their nerve and spurred away in retreat when they saw how they were outnumbered. Yesterday the Birch had not had this many armed riders. Only Lee Bascombe stood his ground. Hunched on the big black horse he poured shot after shot from his rifle. And when you knew the emaciated little gunman's hate, you could see that he was firing only at Dan Hogan, who led the charge toward him. Rip was feverishly reloading. But Juan Garcia beat him to it. Standing coolly, Juan Garcia took careful aim with his rifle and fired. And Lee Bascombe fell not 50 yards from where Jim Riley lay in the short grass. Satisfaction was on Juan Garcia's face as he lowered the rifle and crouched down beside Rip, to whom his flowery Spanish had a note of pathos in its futility. "Now I think my beloved will always be safe," Juan Garcia said, and Rip was sorry he would soon have to learn that the beloved would not be Katie Grayson. Junior Stern threw himself off his lathered horse and joined them. And as the mine men thundered past after the outlaws, they yelled encouragement to Rip and the others. The sheriff's men, the ranchers from Three Forks, the mine men were come to ride out when they hear the shooting. Junior Stern blurted, "Ah, Dios, now is all over." Rip staggered as he stood up. Junior Stern caught his arm. "Senor, is it help you need?" "I sure do," said Rip. "Run out and get the damned white horse before he wanders away. He's mine now and I'm keeping him." The hammering stamp mill was shut down, the mine machinery was silent as Rip and the other three men rode to the gate in the wire. Only armed miners on foot were there to greet them. And while excited questions were asked and answered, Juan Garcia cried, "Where is the Señorita Grayson?" "With her old man, I reckon." "That's where she headed," one of the miners told him. "Señor, I must see her." Juan Garcia appealed to Rip. "I reckon you might as well get it over with," Rip agreed. "I'll take you." Outside the mine office, Juan Garcia helped Rip down and supported him on the injured ankle as they went inside. The door of Grayson's room was closed. "Wait back there in the office," Rip directed. When he was alone, Rip knocked, turned the knob and limped in. Katie Grayson jumped from the edge of the bed where she had been holding her father's hand. She stared at Rip as if he were a ghost, then color flooded into her face. "Are you all safe? Were they in time?" she asked anxiously. Grayson's face was half hidden in bandages, but he looked better. His voice was stronger as he said, "Thank God, you got through all right. Campbell. And got here when you did. A little more and all the riders would have been gone, looking for Katie. What's happening out there?" "Bascom's dead," Rip said. "And so's Riley. The others are hightailing it with your men after them." "So Bascom's dead?" Grayson said heavily. "Well, that saves me a job the hunting him down later on. Katie's just told me what you've all been through." Katie Grayson's color was fading again. Her eyes were big, frightened. "The rest of you," she faltered. "We're all right," said Rip, grinning. "But you've got a problem in young Garcia. He's head over heels in love. It'll take a lot of talking to make him ever think different. I don't want him ever to think different. I love him. Where is he?" Katie cried, turning to the door. Rip's mouth was open soundlessly as she left the room, running toward the office. Silently he questioned Grayson with a look and got a nod in return. "I reckon it's so," the mine owner conceded. "Katie says he's from a good family and swears they both fell in love in a few hours. Know anything about him, Rip?" "His family's good enough," said Rip. "Plenty good." He coughed and put up his hand to hide a grin. "Hell, yes. We're friends. Mighty good friends." "I guess it's all right then," Grayson decided with relief. "Maybe it'd have to be all right anyway, the way Katie feels," he chuckled ruefully. "I didn't bank on getting a son-in-law out of all this. But I guess it's all right. I've talked to Leo Calhoun, and Katie has told me what Stern did. I'll take care of those two men. They're the kind I need." "You too, Rip." "Thanks," Rip said, and chuckled. "Grayson, your daughter got a husband out of this, you got a son-in-law, and I got the best damn horse a man ever rode. So I guess everybody's happy." The end.